Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The ghost of the old gravedigger. Have you ever wondered what happens when a man dies, but his duties live on? What if those responsibilities become chains, binding him to a place long after his body has been laid to rest? The first time I stepped onto the old cemetery grounds, it was with the innocent intent of visiting a distant relative's grave. It was a cold autumn afternoon, the sun barely piercing through the thick layer of clouds that hung low in the sky. The cemetery, tucked away behind an overgrown park, had a strange stillness about it, a kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but heavy, almost suffocating. There were only a few people I'd ever known who had spoken of the place, and most did so with an air of caution. They called it forgotten, a graveyard that had been in the town for over a century but was now overshadowed by the newer, more maintained cemetery on the other side of town. But that didn't stop people from being buried there, people without families, drifters, those who had nowhere else to go in death. My great-uncle was one of them, a man whose life had left few traces except for a weathered headstone among the nameless graves. As I walked through the iron gates, the metal creaked, protesting with a sharp whine. The cold wind brushed against my face, and for a moment I thought I heard a whisper in the breeze, but I shook it off. It was just the wind playing tricks, or so I thought. The graveyard was unkempt, with weeds growing through cracks in the cobblestone path, and headstones tilting at odd angles. There was no sign of life, no birds, no squirrels, not even the usual hum of insects. It was as if this place existed outside of time, forgotten by the living and ignored by nature itself. I found my great-uncle's grave without much trouble. His stone was small and unremarkable, much like the man himself. I knelt, clearing away some dried leaves that had gathered at its base, and muttered a quick prayer. As I stood to leave, something caught my eye, a figure in the distance. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, standing near an old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. He was dressed in a long, tattered coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't move, didn't even seem to be breathing, just stood there watching me. I'm not easily spooked, but there was something about his presence that unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here, that I was trespassing on sacred ground. As I turned to leave, I heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind me. My heart raced, but when I spun around, there was no one there. The man by the tree had vanished. I quickened my pace, eager to get back to the car, but as I reached the gates, something compelled me to look back one last time. The cemetery was empty, but the sensation of being watched lingered, like a cold hand gripping my shoulder. I told myself I was imagining things, that I had just spooked myself with the stories I'd heard about this place. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. A week passed before I returned to the cemetery. This time, it wasn't out of a sense of duty but curiosity. I had become obsessed with the place, thinking constantly about that silent figure by the tree. Who was he? Why did he seem to disappear as soon as I looked away? I had done some research on the graveyard, hoping to find answers, and that's when I first came across the story of the old gravedigger. His name was never mentioned in any official records, but locals spoke of him like he was some sort of legend. He had worked the cemetery for decades, long before it was forgotten, and was said to be fiercely protective of the graves. Some claimed he had gone mad in his later years, that he would sit by the graves late into the night, mumbling to himself, insisting that the dead needed watching. No one knew exactly when he died, but his grave was never marked. They said he was buried somewhere in the cemetery, his resting place unknown, as if he were just another lost soul. As the stories go, the old gravedigger never left his post. After his death, people started seeing him standing near the graves, watching anyone who dared to wander too close to the older sections of the cemetery. They called him a ghost, but others thought he was something worse, a guardian of the dead who had refused to leave his duties behind. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But as I stood at the cemetery gates that second time, a chill ran down my spine. It felt as though I had stepped into a place where the line between the living and the dead was thinner than it should be. I walked deeper into the cemetery, my eyes scanning the graves, searching for the old oak tree where I had seen the figure. The wind was stronger today, rustling the branches and sending dried leaves swirling across the path. I reached the tree, but there was no sign of the man. But then I saw it, a freshly dug patch of earth, the dirt still soft and dark, as if someone had just buried something there. It was odd, considering there hadn't been any recent funerals here. I crouched down, running my hand over the disturbed soil, when a voice, low and raspy, broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice came from behind me, but I was too afraid to turn around. My heart pounded in my chest, and the cold, creeping sensation of dread settled over me. "Leave this place," the voice whispered again, closer this time. "Or you'll never leave at all." I forced myself to turn, my muscles stiff with fear, expecting to see the same figure from before. But there was no one, just the empty cemetery, the wind whipping through the grass, and the faint sound of creaking branches above me. I scanned the area, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my ears. But deep down, I knew better. As I straightened up, I noticed something carved into the old oak tree. At first, it seemed like random scratches, but as I moved closer, I realized they formed words etched deep into the bark. "He watches still." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't seen them the last time I was here, and judging by the depth of the marks, they weren't recent. Whoever had carved them had done so long ago, but the message felt eerily relevant, as if it was meant for me. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet shifted slightly. I glanced down and saw the freshly dug patch of earth move, as if something was stirring beneath the soil. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. My logical side screamed that it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but my instincts told me to leave. Now, I didn't need any more convincing. As I hurried back down the cobblestone path toward the gates, I felt a presence behind me, a shadow that loomed just out of sight. I didn't dare look back this time, my pace quickening with every step. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last, echoing in the suffocating silence of the graveyard. Finally, I reached the iron gates. My hands fumbled with the latch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The gate screeched as I pushed it open, and I bolted through, not stopping until I was safely inside my car. Only then did I allow myself to glance back. The cemetery lay still, as quiet as ever, but I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes watching me, tracking my every move. I quickly started the engine and drove away, not daring to linger a moment longer. For the next few nights, I couldn't sleep. The image of the freshly dug grave haunted my thoughts, along with the voice that had whispered in my ear, warning me to leave. The words carved into the tree replayed in my mind over and over again, "He watches still." What did it mean? Was it a warning? Or a reminder that the old gravedigger's spirit still lingered, bound to the cemetery by some unfinished duty? Despite my better judgment, I couldn't stay away. Something about that place had sunk its claws into me, pulling me back, night after night. I would find myself staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that I needed to return, that there was something waiting for me there. It wasn't long before I gave in. I went back to the cemetery, this time just after sunset. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, with the last traces of daylight fading into darkness. As I parked near the entrance, I could already feel the familiar weight of the graveyard pressing down on me, as if the air itself was heavier here. I brought a flashlight this time, its beam cutting through the thick shadows as I made my way toward the old oak tree. Every step felt deliberate, my footsteps echoing off the cracked stones beneath me. The cemetery was even quieter at night, the silence thick and oppressive. I could hear nothing but the rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of branches, as if the trees themselves were whispering secrets to one another. When I reached the tree, I found the words still carved into the bark, unchanged. The fresh grave, however, was different. The earth was no longer disturbed, it was as if it had never been touched. No sign of digging, no trace of the soft soil I had seen before. It was as if the grave had closed itself, sealed up and hidden from view. But I wasn't alone this time. I could feel it, an overwhelming sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Slowly, I turned, scanning the graves around me. And that's when I saw him. The figure from before, standing a few yards away, near an old mausoleum at the far edge of the cemetery. He was the same as I remembered, dressed in a long, ragged coat, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. But now, in the dim light of the flashlight, I could make out more details. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, they were dark, hollow, as if they belonged to someone who had long since left the realm of the living. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The distance between us felt both vast and unbearably close, as though time itself had stretched thin in this place. I wanted to run, to flee, but my feet were rooted to the spot. It was as if his gaze had trapped me, held me there against my will. Then, slowly, he raised one hand and pointed to the ground at his feet. I followed his gesture, the flashlight beam falling on yet another patch of disturbed earth just in front of the mausoleum. This one was different from the first. It was larger, deeper. A grave, freshly dug. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, but my body refused to move. I watched in horror as the figure bent down and began digging with his hands, scooping up handfuls of dirt like a man possessed. The sound of the earth being torn apart filled the air, a sickening rhythm that seemed to echo in my bones. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the digging stopped. The figure stood again, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. And then, in the faint moonlight, I saw what he had uncovered. It wasn't a coffin. It wasn't even a body. It was something else. A wooden box, withered and worn, its edges splintered with age. The figure stepped aside, as if offering it to me. My hands shook as I approached, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn around and leave. But I couldn't. Something about the box called to me, an ancient pull that I couldn't resist. I knelt beside the grave, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the rough surface of the box. It was cold, unnaturally so, and as I lifted it from the ground, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, thick with an unseen presence. I wanted to open it. Every fiber of my being told me not to, but I needed to know what was inside. With shaking hands, I fumbled with the latch, my breath catching in my throat. The box creaked open. The lid of the box lifted slowly, groaning as if resisting my intrusion. My flashlight flickered at the same moment, casting erratic shadows across the graves. Inside the box, the contents were shrouded in darkness, but something glinted faintly in the dim light. I leaned closer, my heart pounding so loud in my ears it almost drowned out everything else. Inside, lying on a bed of dark velvet, was a single key. Old and rusted, its intricate design hinted at an age-long past, as though it had been crafted for something ancient, something forgotten. As my fingers hovered above it, I felt an icy chill radiating from the key, colder than the autumn air around me. I hesitated, my mind screaming warnings, but my curiosity had already taken control. I picked it up, the metal biting into my skin like frost. Immediately, a wave of dizziness swept over me, and for a brief moment, everything around me seemed to fade, the cemetery, the graves, even the figure watching from the shadows. The world narrowed, and all I could focus on was the key. It was then I heard it, a soft, distant cry, barely audible over the wind. It was coming from the direction of the mausoleum. I turned, my body moving before my mind could catch up. The mausoleum stood like a looming specter in the distance, its stone walls cracked and weathered with age. I hadn't noticed it before, not in such detail, but now it seemed to dominate the landscape, drawing me in with an almost magnetic pull. The figure had vanished, leaving only the freshly dug earth as evidence of his presence. But the key in my hand seemed to throb with a strange energy, guiding me toward the mausoleum. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very air was thickening around me, resisting my approach. As I reached the stone structure, I realized the cry had grown louder, no longer distant, but close, almost within reach. It wasn't the wail of a child, nor the scream of an adult. It was something in between, an otherworldly sound that crawled under my skin and filled me with a deep, primal dread. The mausoleum door was old and rusted, its iron handle worn smooth from years of neglect. I glanced at the key in my hand and knew, without a doubt, that it was meant for this door. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock, the metal grinding against the rust with a grating sound that echoed in the stillness. For a moment, I thought the key wouldn't turn, that it would resist me the way everything else in this place seemed to resist the living. But then, with a final, harsh scrape, the lock gave way. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of cold, stale air that smelled of earth and decay. I shined the flashlight inside, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the dark. The cry was louder now, unmistakable. It was coming from below. I stood at the entrance, torn between the overwhelming urge to flee and the inexplicable compulsion to descend. Something inside me, something I couldn't explain, pushed me forward. My feet moved on their own, carrying me down the steps one by one. The darkness swallowed me whole, the beam of my flashlight barely cutting through the blackness that seemed to press in from all sides. The air grew colder as I descended, each breath becoming harder to draw. The walls were damp, slick with moisture, and the stone steps creaked under my weight. The sound of the cry became clearer, more distinct. It was a voice, but not one I recognized. It whispered my name, low and insistent, like a memory half forgotten. Finally, I reached the bottom of the stairs, and my flashlight flickered, threatening to die out entirely. I was standing in a small, circular room, the walls lined with crumbling stone. At the center of the room was a large stone slab, and on it lay another box, this one larger, made of dark wood, its surface adorned with strange, unfamiliar symbols. My heart raced. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what was inside. But the voice whispered my name again, louder this time, as if it were right beside me. I stepped forward, my feet moving of their own accord, and before I knew it, my hands were on the lid. I lifted it slowly, the creak of the wood splitting the silence like a scream. Inside was a single object, a book. Old and bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. There were no markings on the cover, no title to hint at its contents. But as I stared at it, I felt a strange, overwhelming pull, like the book was calling to me, begging to be opened. My hands shook as I reached for it. The instant my fingers brushed against the cover, a sharp pain shot through my skull, blinding me with white-hot agony. I dropped the flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, its beam casting erratic shadows across the walls. I clutched my head, gasping for breath, but the pain only intensified. Images flashed through my mind, fleeting, fragmented visions of the cemetery, of graves being dug, of a man standing in the shadows, watching. And then, in one terrifying moment, I saw him, the gravedigger. But he wasn't just watching. He was digging my grave. The vision of the gravedigger shoveling earth into a pit, my pit, left me paralyzed with fear. My mind struggled to make sense of what I had just seen. I wanted to scream, to run out of that mausoleum and never look back, but I was trapped by the weight of the realization that I was no longer just an observer. I was now part of this place, bound to its secrets, just like the gravedigger before me. The cry echoed again, louder this time, almost urgent, pulling me back to the present. I forced myself to breathe, steadying my trembling hands as I picked up the flashlight. Its beam flickered weakly, but it was enough to illuminate the book lying in front of me. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't resist. The pull was too strong, almost as if the book was alive, waiting for me to uncover what it hid within its brittle pages. With shaky hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten text, scrawled in an elegant yet eerie script, too old to be recent. As I flipped through, I realized it wasn't just a diary or an account of the dead. No, this book was something else, something darker. Each page detailed the history of the cemetery, going back centuries. It chronicled every grave that had been dug, every soul laid to rest. But something felt wrong. These weren't just records. There were names of people who had never left the cemetery. People who, like me, had come searching for answers and had found something far worse. I flipped faster now, scanning the pages with growing dread. The names started to blur, but one name stood out. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it. My name, written in the same ink, the same meticulous handwriting, as if it had been there all along, waiting for me to find it. The date next to it was today's. I dropped the book, stumbling backward, my heart racing. I couldn't believe what I had seen. It had to be a mistake, a cruel trick. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I knew the truth. The cemetery had claimed me, just like it had claimed the others. The air around me grew colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I felt the presence again, the same presence that had followed me since my first visit. Only this time, it was stronger, more insistent. I wasn't alone in that room. Something was with me, watching, waiting. I turned toward the staircase, ready to flee, but the voice whispered my name again. It wasn't coming from the book. It was coming from the shadows, from the corners of the room where the light from my flashlight couldn't reach. I turned the beam toward the voice, but all I saw was the empty stone walls. The whisper came again, closer now, as if it were right beside me. You can't leave. The words were soft but clear, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and alien. I spun around, expecting to see the gravedigger standing behind me, but there was no one there. My mind raced, panic surging through my veins. I needed to get out of that mausoleum, out of the cemetery, before it was too late. I rushed toward the stairs, but as I reached them, the ground beneath me shifted. The stone floor cracked, and before I could react, I was falling. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, tumbling down into the darkness, and I landed hard on my side, pain shooting through my body. The floor had given way, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the mausoleum. I groaned, trying to push myself up, but my limbs felt heavy, as though something was holding me down. The cold seeped into my bones, and I could feel the presence growing stronger, almost suffocating in its intensity. I reached for the flashlight, its beam now weak and flickering. As I swung it around the chamber, my breath caught in my throat. The walls were lined with coffins, ancient, decayed, they were rotting away with time. But it wasn't the coffins that terrified me. It was the fact that every one of them was open, and they were all empty. Footsteps echoed above me, slow and deliberate, the sound of boots on stone. I knew, without looking, who it was. The gravedigger. He was here. And he wasn't alone. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs slowly, methodically. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my leg. I had to find a way out, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the chamber pressed in on me, the air thick with the stench of decay. The voice spoke again, this time from directly behind me. "You've opened the door." I spun around, shining the flashlight toward the voice, but all I saw was darkness. My chest tightened with fear, my pulse racing. I backed away, but the voice followed me, its tone calm, almost patient. "You shouldn't have come back." My back hit the cold stone wall, and I realized I was trapped. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the broken floor, just out of sight, but I could feel the gravedigger watching me, his presence overwhelming. And then, as if summoned by the darkness itself, a figure stepped into the weak light of my flashlight. It was him, the gravedigger. But he wasn't a man. Not anymore. His skin was gray, tight against his bones, his eyes hollow and black. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his gaunt face, but I could see his lips moving, forming words I couldn't hear. He raised one hand, pointing toward the center of the chamber, and I followed his gesture. There, on the ground, was another grave. Freshly dug. Waiting. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as the realization hit me. The grave was for me. The gravedigger's voice echoed through the chamber, a final, chilling command. "Your time has come." The ground beneath me shifted again, and before I could react, I was falling into the cold, dark earth, the world above me fading into blackness. The darkness was all-consuming. I felt the earth closing around me, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. My body was paralyzed, my mind racing with panic. I clawed at the ground, but it was no use, the soil was too heavy, too dense. It was like being buried alive, trapped in the grave that had been dug just for me. But then, just as quickly as the earth had swallowed me, I felt it loosen. The pressure lifted, and I could breathe again. My hands, once weighed down by the soil, now moved freely. I blinked, expecting to see nothing but the cold, hard ground, but instead, I was somewhere else. I was lying on the stone floor of the mausoleum. Gasping for air, I sat up, my body trembling. The chamber was gone, the broken floor, the empty coffins, all of it had vanished. I was back in the mausoleum, the cold stone walls surrounding me. My flashlight lay a few feet away, its beam casting weak light across the floor. The book was gone, as was the gravedigger. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? The sharp pain in my side and the chill still clinging to my skin told me otherwise. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body aching. The key was still in my pocket, its cold weight a reminder of what I had uncovered. But as I looked around, the mausoleum felt different. It was quiet, unearthingly so. The cry I had heard before was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow every sound. I glanced toward the door, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to run and never return. But something stopped me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The gravedigger, the key, the book, it all pointed to something deeper, something buried within this cemetery that I had yet to uncover. My gaze drifted to the walls, where I noticed, for the first time, faint markings carved into the stone. They were nearly invisible, worn away by time, but they formed a pattern, symbols similar to the ones I had seen on the book. They seemed to form a path, leading away from the mausoleum, out into the cemetery. I stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a wave, but it did little to clear my mind. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the graves, and in the distance, I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. I followed the markings, my steps slow and deliberate, each one taking me deeper into the cemetery. The further I walked, the more I noticed the graves, some old, their headstones crumbling, others more recent. But none of them were ordinary. Each headstone was marked with the same symbols I had seen in the mausoleum, the same symbols that had been etched into the book. And then, as I rounded a corner, I saw it. A grave unlike any of the others. The headstone was tall and made of black marble, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting the pale light of the moon. It stood alone, set apart from the other graves, as if it didn't belong here. I approached cautiously, my breath catching in my throat as I read the inscription on the stone. Here lies the keeper of the secrets, bound to this place for eternity. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see the gravedigger emerge from the shadows, but the cemetery was empty. The wind had died down, and the air was still, unearthingly so. I stared at the grave, my mind racing with questions. Who was the keeper? What secrets had they guarded? And more importantly, why was I here? Before I could think any further, I noticed something at the base of the headstone. A small, square patch of earth, freshly turned, as if it had been dug up and filled again recently. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched down, brushing the loose soil away with my hands. Beneath the surface, something hard and cold met my fingers. I dug deeper, my hands trembling with both fear and anticipation, until I uncovered a small box. It was identical to the one I had found in the mausoleum, its surface smooth and unmarked, save for the same symbols etched into the lid. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me not to open it. But I knew I had no choice. This was what I had come for, even if I didn't understand why. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed with age. I unfolded it slowly, the edges crumbling slightly under my touch. The handwriting was the same as in the book, the elegant script flowing across the page. You are the next. The words blurred as my vision swam, my heart racing with panic. I stumbled back, dropping the box as the realization hit me like a wave. This was why the cemetery had called me, why the gravedigger had watched from the shadows. I wasn't just uncovering secrets. I was becoming part of them. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees like a warning. I stood there, staring at the note, the weight of its meaning settling over me like a shroud. The gravedigger had been the keeper, bound to this place, guarding its secrets. And now, it was my turn. The silence around me seemed to deepen as the reality of my situation sank in. The cemetery wasn't just a place for the dead to rest, it was alive, in a way I could barely comprehend. And it had chosen me, just as it had chosen the gravedigger before me. The weight of that realization crushed my chest, making it hard to breathe. I looked down at the piece of paper again, the words staring back at me, "You are the next." Next for what? To guard this place? To bury more secrets? Or was it something worse, something I couldn't yet grasp? The box at my feet seemed to vibrate, as though it pulsed with the same dark energy that now filled the air around me. I didn't want to touch it again, but something in me knew that leaving it behind wasn't an option. It was part of me now, part of the cemetery's hold on me. With shaking hands, I picked up the box and shoved it into my coat pocket, feeling its cold presence against my side. I glanced at the inscription on the headstone one more time, bound to this place for eternity. I couldn't let that be me. There had to be a way out, some way to break the connection. But every instinct in my body told me that once the cemetery chose you, there was no escape. I turned, making my way back toward the entrance. My steps hurried, but my mind was a storm of thoughts. Each grave I passed now felt like a warning, a reminder of those who had come before me, never to leave. And with every step, I felt that presence again, watching, waiting. The gravedigger's shadow seemed to stretch behind me, though I saw no sign of him. Just as I neared the gate, something stopped me in my tracks. A figure stood in the middle of the path, blocking my way. I couldn't make out their face, but they seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, a presence both real and unreal at the same time. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized who it was. It was the gravedigger, but not the decayed figure I had seen before. No, this version of him looked alive. His form was solid, his clothes clean, and his eyes, though shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, seemed to gleam with life. He said nothing, just stood there, his expression unreadable. But I knew what he wanted. Why me? I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you choose me? For a long moment, the gravedigger didn't respond. He simply stared at me, his figure as still as a statue. Then, slowly, he raised one hand, pointing back toward the heart of the cemetery. I shook my head, taking a step back. No. No, I don't belong here. I don't. But before I could finish, the ground beneath me rumbled. The air grew thick, and the wind roared through the trees, as if the entire cemetery was coming to life. The headstones seemed to shift, the earth beneath them trembling as though something beneath the surface was trying to break free. I looked back at the gravedigger, but he was gone, vanished into the night as if he had never been there. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned toward the gate, but it was too late. The iron bars of the gate slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing me inside. I ran to it, grabbing the cold metal with both hands and shaking it with all my strength, but it didn't budge. I was trapped. The wind howled louder, and I could feel the presence of the cemetery closing in on me, tightening its grip. The symbols on the headstones seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing with an eerie light that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the gate, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here. I had to find another way out. But as I turned to look for an escape, I saw them. Figures. Shadows moving among the graves. They were faint at first, barely visible, but as I stared, they became clearer. Men, women, even children, dozens of them, all moving silently through the cemetery, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. They walked with a slow, deliberate purpose, as though they were searching for something or someone. And then I realized they were all heading toward me. Panic surged through me, and I ran, my heart pounding in my ears. The cemetery seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, the graves multiplying, the trees closing in. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from them. But no matter how fast I ran, the figures followed. Their pace never quickened, but they were always just behind me, their presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unfeeling, as if they already knew my fate. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing, a small, open space in the middle of the cemetery. In the center was an old, decrepit chapel, its stone walls crumbling, its windows shattered. I didn't have a choice. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. The chapel was dark, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the broken windows. The air inside was cold, colder than outside, and it smelled of damp stone and decay. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, listening. The figures outside had stopped. I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore, but I knew they were still there, waiting just beyond the chapel walls. I turned, taking in the inside of the chapel. It was small, with rows of decaying pews and a stone altar at the front. On the wall behind the altar was a large, faded painting of a figure in robes, the keeper of the secrets, I realized, the same figure from the inscription on the grave. But there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed at first. A small door behind the altar, half hidden by the shadows. A part of me knew I shouldn't open it. I should stay where I was, safe inside the chapel. But the same pull that had brought me here in the first place was back, stronger than ever. It was as if the door was calling to me, urging me to see what lay behind it. With trembling hands, I walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for only a moment before reaching out and turning the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. I stood at the top of the narrow staircase, staring down into the blackness below. The air that rose from the depths was thick and damp, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent. The pull to descend was strong, stronger than anything I had felt before. My hand gripped the doorframe as I hesitated, every instinct in my body telling me to turn back. But something deeper, something primal, urged me forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the first stone step. It creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing in the silence of the chapel. I paused, glancing behind me at the empty space, where I knew the figures still waited just beyond the walls. The cemetery was alive with their presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for me to make a choice. I descended, my footsteps slow and careful. The staircase spiraled downward, deeper into the earth, the air growing colder with each step. My flashlight flickered weakly in the darkness, the narrow beam barely illuminating the steps ahead. I could feel the weight of the cemetery above me, pressing down like a heavy blanket, suffocating as if it were trying to drag me into its depths. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The stairs opened into a small, underground chamber. The walls were made of rough stone, covered in a thick layer of moss and grime, and the floor was damp beneath my feet. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, similar to the one in the chapel above, but this one was different. This altar wasn't empty. Lying on the cold stone surface was a body wrapped in a decaying shroud. The cloth was old and stained, but through the tattered fabric, I could see the contours of a skeletal form beneath. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me, but I couldn't look away. This wasn't just a grave. It was a tomb. I approached slowly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The closer I got, the more I could make out the details of the figure beneath the shroud. The body was ancient, its skin dried and cracked, clinging to the bones like parchment. But there was something familiar about it, something that made my heart race with dread. Then, I saw it. A silver key, identical to the one I had found in the mausoleum, hung around the figure's neck, tied with a thin, frayed cord. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the cold metal burning against my fingertips. The key was small, simple, but I knew its significance. It was the key to something far more sinister than I had imagined. As I lifted the key from the body's neck, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and I could feel a presence, something dark and malevolent, stirring in the chamber with me. My pulse quickened, and I took a step back, clutching the key tightly in my hand. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the chamber. It was the soft scrape of stone against stone. I turned sharply, my flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. At first, I saw nothing, but then I noticed it. One of the stones in the far wall was moving, sliding back to reveal a hidden passage. The air that poured from the opening was even colder than before, thick with the scent of decay. I knew I should have left. I should have run, thrown the key away, and never looked back. But something about the passage called to me, just as the staircase had. It was as if the cemetery itself was pulling me deeper into its secrets, daring me to uncover what lay buried within its earth. With a deep breath, I stepped toward the passage. The narrow tunnel stretched ahead, barely wide enough for me to walk through without brushing the walls. I moved cautiously, the light from my flashlight flickering as I ventured further into the darkness. The floor beneath me was uneven, the stones wet and slippery, and the walls seemed to close in around me the deeper I went. The tunnel twisted and turned, its path winding like a snake through the earth. Time seemed to lose all meaning down here, and I had no idea how far I had gone or how long I had been walking. All I knew was that the further I went, the stronger the sense of dread grew in my chest. Finally, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was larger than the first, its walls lined with more of the strange symbols I had seen throughout the cemetery. But what caught my attention wasn't the walls. It was the large stone sarcophagus that stood in the center of the room. Unlike the crude stone of the first tomb, this one was intricately carved, with symbols and figures etched into its surface. The lid was slightly ajar, as if it had been pushed aside recently, and a faint glow emanated from within. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. The glow grew brighter as I drew closer, a sickly, greenish light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. My hands shook as I reached out to touch the sarcophagus, my fingers brushing the cold stone. Suddenly, the lid shifted with a deafening groan, sliding open to reveal what lay inside. My breath caught in my throat. Inside the sarcophagus, resting atop a bed of decaying cloth, was the gravedigger. Or what was left of him. His body was skeletal, his bones wrapped in the same shroud of decay as the figure in the previous tomb. But his eyes, his hollow, empty eye sockets, seemed to glow with the same greenish light that filled the chamber. His jaw hung open in a silent scream, as if he had been trapped here for centuries, waiting for someone to find him. And then, his hand moved. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly as the gravedigger's skeletal hand reached out from the sarcophagus. The key in my pocket seemed to burn, and I clutched at it, my heart racing with terror. The air in the chamber grew thick with the stench of death, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the symbols glowing brighter and brighter. The gravedigger's hand clenched into a fist, and I knew what he wanted. The key. Without thinking, I pulled the key from my pocket and held it out, my hands trembling. The gravedigger's skeletal fingers wrapped around the key, and for a moment, everything went still. The air in the chamber was heavy with anticipation, the silence deafening. And then, with a sudden, violent force, the gravedigger's body crumbled into dust, the key falling from his hand to the floor with a soft clink. The glow faded, and the chamber plunged into darkness. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The glow had vanished, leaving me in a void of darkness, the only sound my ragged breathing. My hands trembled as I reached for the flashlight, desperately clicking the button to bring the light back to life, but it wouldn't respond. The cold grip of fear tightened around me as I realized I was truly alone, deep beneath the cemetery, in a place no one knew existed. The key lay on the ground, its metallic surface glinting faintly in the shadows. I hesitated, unsure if I should pick it up again. But something told me it was still important, that my fate was tied to it in ways I couldn't yet understand. Reluctantly, I bent down and scooped it up, the weight of the cold metal feeling heavier than before. I needed to get out of there. The oppressive darkness and the strange occurrences had me on the edge of panic, and I didn't want to find out what else might be lurking in the depths of the cemetery. Turning toward the passage from which I had come, I took a deep breath and began to make my way back, each step deliberate and cautious. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, the stone walls seeming to press in closer the deeper I moved. My mind raced with thoughts of what I had just seen, the gravedigger's body, his reaching hand, and the way he had turned to dust the moment the key left his grasp. What was this key's true purpose? Why had it been placed around the neck of the dead? As I neared the end of the passage, the chapel's dim light once again appeared in my view. The faint glow from the broken windows was a welcome sight after the darkness of the tomb, but I knew that whatever secrets lay beneath the cemetery were far from over. I stepped back into the chapel, the cold air biting at my skin. The figures from outside were no longer visible through the shattered glass, but I could feel their presence lingering, waiting for me to take the next step. Without warning, a sharp creak echoed through the chapel. I spun around, heart racing, to find the source of the noise. My eyes landed on the altar, where the faded painting of the robed figure had become even more unnerving. The figure's eyes, once still and lifeless, now seemed to follow my every move. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved closer to the altar, drawn by some invisible force. The weight of the key in my pocket was almost unbearable now, as if it had somehow become an anchor to this place. My hand shook as I touched the altar's cold stone, running my fingers over the ancient carvings, the same symbols that had been etched into the walls of the underground chamber. And then I saw it, another hidden compartment beneath the altar. I hesitated. Hadn't I had enough of the cemetery's dark secrets? But there was no turning back now. My fingers found the edge of the stone slab, and with a grunt, I slid it aside. The compartment revealed a small, weathered journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the leather cover cracked and brittle. I opened the journal with trembling hands. The writing inside was old, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic script. It took me a moment to make out the words, but as I read, my blood ran cold. To those who follow in my footsteps, know this: once you take the key, you are bound to the cemetery's will. There is no escaping its grasp. It was never meant to be kept by the living, for it holds the power to awaken the dead, to unleash what should remain buried. The gravedigger is merely the keeper, but the true secret lies beneath the earth, in the tombs that no man should disturb. I felt my stomach drop. The key wasn't just a key, it was a link to something far darker, something ancient and malevolent. And I had disturbed it. My mind reeled as I flipped through the journal, trying to find more answers. The final entry chilled me to the core. If you are reading this, it is too late. You have been chosen, as I was, and now you must guard the cemetery's secrets. But beware, the dead do not rest easily. They are always watching, waiting for the moment to return. And when they do, there will be no stopping them. The journal slipped from my hands, landing on the stone floor with a dull thud. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The gravedigger hadn't just been a guardian of the cemetery, he had been trapped, bound to this place by the very key I now held. And now, I was next. The weight of the cemetery's curse settled over me like a suffocating shroud. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker, thicker, as if the very air was turning against me. The figures outside, the dead, were waiting, and I could feel their hunger, their need to return to the world of the living. I had to escape. I couldn't let the cemetery claim me, couldn't let its dark secrets consume my soul. But every instinct told me that leaving wasn't an option. The cemetery had chosen me, and once it had you, there was no escape. In a blind panic, I ran to the chapel door, yanking it open with all my strength. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, but the relief was short-lived. The cemetery stretched out before me, an endless maze of graves and shadows, the iron gates still shut tight, trapping me inside. And then I saw them. The figures. They stood just beyond the chapel, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their bodies motionless, as if waiting for something. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what they were waiting for. Me. I had become the cemetery's next keeper. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened with a sense of inevitability, the weight of my situation crashing down like a tidal wave. The figures outside the chapel were no longer distant shapes. They were moving now, closer, slowly advancing as if they had all the time in the world. I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it as if I could keep them out. The wood creaked under the pressure of my trembling hands. My pulse was racing, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. What had I done? What was I becoming? The journal's words echoed in my mind. You have been chosen. There is no escape. My fingers instinctively clenched around the key, the cold metal digging into my palm. The curse, the key, it had all begun with that damn thing. If it was the source, then perhaps there was still a way out. Perhaps destroying the key could break the hold the cemetery had over me. But how? I glanced around the chapel, searching for something, anything, that could help. My eyes landed on the altar, its ancient stone surface now feeling less like a relic and more like a looming tombstone. I moved toward it, my hand shaking as I fumbled to retrieve the key from my pocket. Just as I placed it on the altar, the temperature in the room dropped. A deep chill settled over me, as if the very air had frozen. I could feel it, the presence of the cemetery itself, pressing down on me, watching me with unseen eyes. The key seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if it held the cemetery's lifeblood in its tiny, intricate form. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a low, guttural whisper. The voice, though barely audible, was clear and cold, echoing from the walls like a distant wail carried by the wind. You cannot break what is eternal. I froze. The voice, it didn't sound human. It came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through my bones like a cold wave of dread. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was no longer alone in the chapel. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the shadows. The figures had not yet breached the door, but something else was there, something unseen. I could feel its gaze, heavy and unrelenting, as though the very walls were watching me. The voice spoke again, this time closer, more insistent. You are one of us now. accept your fate. I stumbled back, almost knocking the key off the altar. My mind was screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The chapel had become a prison, the cemetery's grip tightening with each passing second. Desperation clawed at my thoughts as I clutched the key, wondering if destroying it could really free me from this nightmare. But how do you destroy something that is bound by death itself? I needed fire, something to burn the key, to melt it down to nothing. But the chapel had no source of heat, no way to generate the fire I needed. The growing panic gnawed at my resolve, and I found myself pacing back and forth, trapped in the cycle of my own fear. The figures outside were now at the door. I could hear their faint shuffling, their low murmurs, like a chorus of the dead rising from the earth. They were waiting for me to open the door, to accept the role that had been thrust upon me. I was their replacement, and they would not leave until I took the gravedigger's place. I couldn't let that happen. I ran to the window, desperate for an escape. The stained glass was cracked and broken, allowing only slivers of the moonlight to shine through, casting eerie patterns on the floor. I leaned against the cold stone wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cemetery stretched out before me, vast and eternal, the graves stretching endlessly into the fog. There had to be another way out. I couldn't be the next keeper of this cursed ground. I couldn't be the one who watched over the dead for eternity, trapped in this cycle of death and madness. And then, like a flash of inspiration, the journal's final words came back to me. Beware, the dead do not rest easily. They are always watching, waiting for the moment to return. The key wasn't just a tool, it was a seal. It was the thing that kept the dead locked in their graves, prevented them from returning to the world of the living. But if I still had the key, if I held that power, I didn't have to be the one trapped here. I didn't have to be the next keeper. I could release them. With trembling hands, I moved to the altar and grabbed the key. The figures were now at the door, pushing against the wood with a soft, insistent pressure. The whispers had grown louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices, all urging me to accept my fate. But I wasn't going to accept it. Not like this. I rushed to the window, gripping the key tightly. The wind howled through the broken glass, the cold biting in my skin as I leaned out over the ledge. Below me, the cemetery stretched out like a maze of forgotten souls, the fog swirling in ghostly patterns. I raised the key above my head, ready to throw it into the night. But just as I was about to let go, a sharp pain shot through my chest. I gasped, my body freezing in place as the sensation spread, burning through my veins like ice. I looked down in horror to see the faint outline of a hand, no, several hands, reaching through the window, gripping my arm, my chest, my very soul. The dead were waiting for me to join them. They were pulling me to them. I tried to scream, but the sound was lost in the howling wind. My body was dragged backward, the world spinning as I fell from the ledge, the key still clutched tightly in my hand. The ground rushed up to meet me, but before I could hit, everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the cold, hard ground of the cemetery. The fog had lifted, revealing the graves in sharp, unnerving detail. My body ached, but I was alive. I stood slowly, my mind reeling. The key was gone, vanished from my grasp. The figures, too, had disappeared, leaving the cemetery as silent as the grave. But something was different. I turned toward the chapel, the once familiar building now feeling distant, foreign. And then I realized it wasn't just the key that was gone. The cemetery itself had changed. The graves were no longer ordinary, no longer simple markers of the dead. They were open, every single one of them, yawning pits of darkness, as if the earth itself had swallowed the dead whole. I backed away, heart racing. What had I done? What had I unleashed? And then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the cemetery, silhouetted against the rising sun, was a figure, a gravedigger, shovel in hand. His hollow eyes locked with mine, and I understood in that moment. I hadn't escaped. I was the gravedigger now. The dead were free. Demon Priest. Have you ever felt a presence lingering just out of sight, a whisper in the shadows that seems to follow you home? I did, long before I realized the truth. It was a feeling I had dismissed for years, but as I sit here now, the weight of my choices presses down on me like a shroud. I was a simple priest in a small town, one known for its quaint church nestled between two ancient oak trees. The parishioners were a tight-knit community, bound by faith and a shared history. They looked to me for guidance, solace, and hope. But deep down, I craved more than the ordinary life of a clergyman. I wanted power, the kind of power that could bend reality, control fate, and even transcend death. It all began when I found a dusty old book in the church attic, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed and brittle. The title, Rituals of the Forgotten, sent shivers down my spine. I should have tossed it aside, but curiosity gnawed at me like a ravenous beast. The air was thick with dust, and as I opened it, a musty odor filled my nostrils, intoxicating and heavy. As I read, a strange energy enveloped me. The words on the page were unlike anything I had ever encountered. They seemed to hum with a life of their own. I became enthralled, spending countless nights poring over the cryptic instructions. It spoke of ancient pacts, exchanges of souls, and the dark forces that dwelled just beyond our understanding. The thought of bargaining with a demon both terrified and excited me. I found myself drawn deeper into the world of the occult, ignoring the warning signs that littered my path. My dreams grew vivid, filled with shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. I often awoke in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced that something was watching me from the corners of my room. It was on a stormy night, with thunder crashing like an angry god above, that I finally made my choice. The ritual required a sacrifice, an offering to the demon that promised to grant me what I desired most. I convinced myself it was for the greater good. After all, who wouldn't want to wield power to protect their flock? The hypocrisy was lost on me in that moment. I prepared the altar in the chapel, drawing symbols on the floor with trembling hands, each stroke pulsating with my growing anxiety. Candles flickered ominously, casting elongated shadows that twisted and warped like phantoms. As I began the incantation, I felt the air grow heavier, charged with an electricity that made my skin tingle. The words tumbled from my lips, an ancient language that felt both foreign and familiar. With each syllable, I could sense a presence building, a darkness wrapping itself around my spirit. Just as I reached the climax of the ritual, a voice echoed in my mind, smooth and seductive, promising me power beyond my wildest dreams. In that moment of vulnerability, I made my choice, sealing my fate with an unholy pact. The shadows in the room surged forth, coiling around me, binding my soul to the entity lurking just beyond the veil of reality. I felt a rush of energy unlike anything I had ever experienced, a flood of power coursing through my veins, but at a steep price. The moment I accepted the gift, I lost a part of myself, a fragment forever trapped in darkness. From that day on, everything changed. I could feel the demon's presence, a constant companion whispering in my ear, urging me to take risks, to exert my newfound power. I became emboldened, my sermons laced with a fervor that captivated my congregation. They hung on my every word, blissfully unaware of the sinister forces at play. But with power comes a terrible price. Soon, I began to notice strange occurrences around the church. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision during services, and the candles would blow out despite the lack of a draft. Whispers echoed in the hallowed halls, voices calling out to me, coaxing me into deeper darkness. As the weeks passed, the townsfolk reported unsettling dreams, visions of a shadowy figure watching them from the corners of their rooms. They shared their fears with me, seeking comfort in my presence, but deep down, I felt the creeping dread settle in my bones. The realization that I was the source of their terror began to gnaw at my conscience, but it was too late. I was already in too deep. On one particularly cold evening, I was preparing to leave the church after a long day of confession when I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the ornate mirror hanging in the hallway. A fleeting shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, seemed to flicker just out of reach. My heart raced as I turned to look, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But the next day, it happened again. This time, the shadow lingered a moment longer, as if studying me, contemplating my very essence. I could feel the weight of its gaze, a suffocating pressure that made me want to scream. Yet I remained silent, caught in a web of my own making, as the town continued to spiral deeper into a nightmare. As days turned into weeks, the church's once sacred halls transformed into a sinister playground for the shadows I had summoned. My parishioners, once filled with faith and hope, began to exhibit signs of despair. They spoke of nightmares that left them drenched in cold sweat, haunted by a figure that lurked just outside the periphery of their consciousness. Their fear was palpable, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a leaden shroud. I tried to console them, to reassure them that their faith would protect them from any dark forces. Yet, deep down, I knew I was lying. The demon I had summoned was growing stronger, feeding off their terror like a ravenous beast. It delighted in their anguish, a twisted reflection of the power I had so recklessly sought. One evening, after a particularly unsettling service, I received a knock on my office door. It was Margaret, an elderly woman with deep lines etched into her weathered face. She was a pillar of our community, known for her unwavering devotion. But tonight, her eyes were filled with a desperation that struck me to the core. "Father," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something in my home. I feel it watching me, creeping into my dreams. I thought I could ignore it, but it's getting worse." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I knew what she was experiencing was no mere figment of imagination. It was the demon's influence, reaching out to claim yet another soul. I struggled to maintain my composure, offering her comfort while my mind raced with guilt. "Margaret, it's important to pray. Keep your faith strong, and the Lord will protect you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded, but the fear in her eyes lingered, a haunting reminder of my failure. As the days passed, I found myself increasingly unable to sleep. The demon's presence pressed against me like an invisible weight, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. It taunted me with promises of greatness, urging me to embrace the darkness that had begun to envelop my soul. One night, I ventured back to the chapel, drawn by an unexplainable compulsion. The moonlight spilled through the stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns across the floor. The air felt charged with an energy that sent shivers down my spine. I approached the altar, my heart pounding in rhythm with the unsettling quiet. As I knelt before the altar, I felt the chill of something creeping up my spine. I could hear the whispers clearer now, curling around my mind like smoke. "Embrace the shadows," they beckoned, and I found myself surrendering to the seductive allure of power. Suddenly, I was jolted from my reverie by a noise that echoed through the empty chapel. It was a soft, mournful cry, a sound that pierced the silence like a knife. I stood, heart racing, scanning the shadows. Had I truly disturbed something from beyond? The cry echoed again, louder this time, and I realized it was coming from the confessional. I approached cautiously, my breath quickening. As I peered through the screen, I saw nothing but darkness. The whispers swirled around me, mingling with the darkness, urging me to uncover the source of the haunting. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky, but there was only silence in response. I hesitated, battling the urge to flee, but I was too deeply ensnared by my curiosity. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, stepping into the small, dimly lit confessional. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, as if the very walls were closing in on me. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself, when suddenly, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, but the confessional was empty. Heart racing, I fled the confessional and stumbled into the main church hall. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. I was not alone. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and I could feel the presence of the demon surrounding me, its essence seeping into the very fabric of the church. With every passing moment, the reality of my situation grew clearer. I had invited this darkness into our lives. I could no longer deny the truth. I was responsible for the suffering of my congregation. The guilt weighed heavy on my heart, but as I knelt in prayer, seeking forgiveness, I heard a familiar voice, smooth and enticing, echo in my mind. "Why fight it, priest? You can harness this power. You can be their savior or their destroyer." The words clawed at my sanity, and I felt the boundaries of my own will start to crumble. What had begun as a quest for strength had morphed into something sinister and uncontrollable. I was spiraling into a darkness I could not escape, and the voices of my parishioners, once a source of comfort, now filled me with dread. The following Sunday, as I stood before the congregation, I could see the fear etched on their faces. They clutched their rosaries, their eyes darting around the church, searching for reassurance. But I had none to offer them. The weight of the demon's presence bore down on me, and I felt as though I was performing in a theater of horror, trapped in a role I could no longer play. "Fear not," I began, forcing my voice to remain steady, "for the Lord is with us." But my words felt hollow, like echoes in an empty chamber. I could sense the darkness pooling just beyond the altar, ready to consume everything I had once held dear. After the service, I returned to my office, my heart heavy with despair. I needed to confront the demon, to regain control before it consumed my soul entirely. I grabbed the old book, my fingers trembling as I flipped through its pages, searching for a way to undo the pact I had so foolishly made. But as I read, I found that the words seemed to shift and change, the incantations taunting me, promising power but leaving me with nothing but despair. I realized then that the bond one had forged was not so easily broken. The demon had no intention of releasing me from its grip. That night, as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. The shadows in my room twisted and writhed, mocking my fear. I could feel the demon's breath on my skin, cold and sinister, whispering promises of what I could achieve if I only surrendered completely. I wanted to scream, to wake from this nightmare, but I was paralyzed by a deep, unrelenting terror. The darkness coiled around me like a serpent, and as I closed my eyes, I felt myself slipping away. As the days turned into nights, I found myself caught in a spiraling descent, a shadowy abyss that threatened to engulf me whole. I no longer recognized the man I once was. The reverend priest who had guided his flock with compassion was fading, replaced by being driven by fear and desperation. The town felt different now, suffocated by an unseen weight. Every glance from my parishioners bore the burden of unspoken dread. They walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact as if fearing the darkness that had seeped into their lives. I could see it in their eyes, the flicker of paranoia, the haunting disbelief of what they felt but could not articulate. They sensed the demon's presence, and I was powerless to shield them. One evening, I decided to confront my fears directly. I gathered my courage and ventured back to the chapel, the familiar creaking of the wooden floorboards echoing my anxious heartbeat. The shadows clung to the walls like ominous specters, and I felt the air grow thick with tension as I approached the altar. It was time to reclaim my power, or to lose it completely. Kneeling in front of the altar, I closed my eyes, summoning all my strength. "I demand you reveal yourself," I shouted into the silence, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The response was immediate. A low growl emanated from the depths of the church, reverberating through my very core. I opened my eyes to find the candles flickering violently, their flames warping into sinister shapes. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath hanging in the air like a ghostly wisp. "Your power is nothing without me, priest," a voice hissed, slithering through the darkness like a serpent. It was deep and rich, resonating with a menace that sent shivers down my spine. "You cannot control me. You are mine." The realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. The demon was no longer just a distant whisper in my mind. It had taken root within me, entwining its essence with my very soul. The fear I had been trying to suppress now surged forth, threatening to drown me. "Leave them alone," I cried out, my voice hoarse, desperation coloring my words. "I did this for them. I wanted to protect them." A chilling laughter echoed through the chapel, reverberating off the walls. "Protection? You offered them nothing but despair. Their souls are ripe for the taking, and you will help me claim them." I stumbled backward, the weight of its words sinking in. My pact had not just cursed me, it had condemned my congregation to a fate worse than death. The shadows loomed larger, encroaching upon my vision, and I felt my resolve wavering. In a moment of clarity, I realized that I had to fight back, to reclaim my agency. I recalled snippets from the ancient book, the rituals that had drawn me into this hell. There had to be a way to reverse the damage, to sever the ties that bound me to this demon. Rushing back to my office, I feverishly flipped through the pages of the book, searching for anything that could help. My hands trembled as I scanned the texts, desperate to find the answers I needed. The symbols swam before my eyes, each one a reminder of the choice I had made. Finally, I found a passage that seemed to shimmer with promise, a rite of exorcism designed to banish dark entities. Hope flickered within me, igniting a flame of determination. I gathered the necessary materials, salt, holy water, and candles, my heart racing as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be my final confrontation. As I set up the altar, the church began to tremble, as if anticipating the clash of forces. The shadows thickened, coiling around me, and the demon's voice filled the air, swirling in a cacophony of mocking laughter. "You think you can rid yourself of me? You will only succeed in condemning your soul further." Ignoring its taunts, I recited the incantations with fervor, each word a battle cry against the darkness. The room crackled with energy, and for a moment, I felt a surge of power wash over me, igniting my spirit. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. But then the demon unleashed its fury. A howling wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the candles and sending the materials I had gathered spiraling into the air. I staggered back, my heart pounding in my chest as the shadows converged, forming a terrifying shape before me, a monstrous figure wreathed in darkness. "You are weak, priest," it roared, a voice that echoed like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the church. "You will bow before me or face annihilation." In that moment, I felt the full weight of my choices crashing down on me. I had let ambition cloud my judgment, and now I was paying the price. But I could not give in. Not when the souls of my congregation hung in the balance. Fueled by desperation, I gathered my strength and launched into the final part of the ritual, my voice ringing with authority. "In the name of the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this place. You have no power here." The demon shrieked, a sound that pierced through the fabric of reality, as if the very essence of evil was unraveling. The shadows writhed and recoiled, and I felt the altar tremble beneath me. With one final incantation, I unleashed a burst of energy that surged forth from my core, enveloping the demon in a brilliant light. It screamed, a sound filled with rage and agony, and then silence. The darkness dissipated, leaving the church in a heavy stillness. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath as the weight of the world lifted from my shoulders. Had I succeeded? Had I banished the demon? But as I looked around, the flickering candlelight revealed something terrifying. The church was empty, devoid of life. I staggered to my feet, heart racing as I stumbled into the pews, calling out for my congregation. "Margaret! Anyone!" My voice echoed in the emptiness, but there was no answer. The silence that followed was suffocating, a vacuum of despair that swallowed my cries. Suddenly, a soft whisper echoed through the chapel, curling around my heart like a vice. "You thought you could rid yourself of me? I am everywhere now, and they are lost because of you." Panic surged within me as I understood the true horror of my actions. The demon had not just haunted my congregation, it had consumed their souls, leaving me to bear the burden of my guilt alone. I had become the very monster I sought to vanquish. Despair washed over me like a wave, crashing relentlessly against the shores of my sanity. I staggered back, the realization sinking in with the weight of lead. The faces of my parishioners flashed before my eyes, each one a haunting reminder of my failure, the laughter of children, the hopeful prayers, the warmth of community, all now turned to dust by my reckless ambition. As I stumbled through the empty church, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the hallowed halls. "You are alone now, priest. You sought power, and now it is yours to bear, alone." The voice slithered into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a cold serpent. Desperation clawed at my insides. "No! This can't be the end." I shouted into the silence, the sound of my voice swallowed by the oppressive void. I sank to my knees, my hands clutching the altar, fingers digging into the wood as if trying to anchor myself to reality. But reality was slipping away. The walls of the church began to warp, the familiar structure twisting into something grotesque, shadows pooling into dark corners like sinister stains. I closed my eyes, willing the image to clear, but it only intensified, becoming a swirling maelstrom of darkness and despair. In that chaos, I felt a flicker of hope, a memory of a time before the pact. I remembered the love I had for my congregation, the purpose I found in guiding them. I recalled Margaret's faith, the strength of our community. It had to mean something. Suddenly, an image formed in my mind, a candle flickering in the dark, a symbol of hope against the encroaching shadows. I grasped onto that vision, drawing strength from it. "I will not be your puppet." I screamed into the abyss, standing with newfound determination. I will fight for them. With each word, I felt the shadows recede slightly, the oppressive weight lessening. The church shuddered, as if the very fabric of reality was shifting in response to my defiance. You cannot take what does not belong to you. I continued, my voice rising, my heart pounding with conviction. The darkness swirled angrily, the whispers morphing into a chorus of fury. Foolish priest. They are already lost. You cannot save them. But something deep within me ignited. No! I cried, feeling the power of my faith surge through me. I will find them. I will bring them back. I focused on the memories of my parishioners, drawing each one close to my heart. I envisioned Margaret, her steadfast gaze, the warmth of her presence. I imagined the laughter of children playing in the churchyard, their innocence radiating like light. They were not lost, they were within me, woven into the very fabric of my soul. In that moment of clarity, I remembered the final incantation from the old book. It was a spell not just of banishment but of reclamation, an invocation to draw back the lost souls into the light. With renewed vigor, I closed my eyes and began to chant, each word spilling forth with an intensity one had never known. By the power of light, I call upon the lost. Return to me. Return to the light. My voice rose to a crescendo, echoing off the walls as the air shimmered with energy. The shadows writhed violently, a cacophony of screams filling the air, but I stood firm, my spirit intertwined with the memories of my congregation. You will not take them. They belong to the light. With one final shout, I unleashed the last of my energy, channeling every ounce of love and hope I had into the words. The shadows screamed, their essence splintering into 1,000 tiny shards, each one a fragment of despair. And then, like a great wind, they were swept away, leaving only the stillness of the chapel behind. When I opened my eyes, the church was transformed. The air was bright and filled with warmth, the familiar scent of incense wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. I felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. I looked around, heart racing, and gasped at what I saw. The pews were filled with my congregation, their faces serene, bathed in a golden light. Margaret smiled at me, her eyes twinkling with gratitude. The children giggled, their laughter echoing like a melody through the air. It was as if the darkness had never touched them. Father! Margaret called, her voice sweet and clear. You saved us. Tears streamed down my cheeks, a mixture of relief and joy flooding my heart. I thought I had lost you all, I whispered, stepping forward to embrace her. But as I held her, a cold wind swept through the chapel, a reminder of the darkness that had nearly consumed me. The memories of my pact loomed large in my mind, a shadow that would forever remain. I may have saved you, I said, pulling back to look into her eyes, but I will forever carry the weight of my choices. The darkness will always be a part of me. Margaret nodded, understanding etched in her features. But we're with you now, Father. We will stand together against the shadows. With her words echoing in my heart, I knew that while the demon may have been banished, the battle was not over. The darkness would always be lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness. But I would not face it alone. My congregation, my community, was my shield against the encroaching night. And as I stood there, surrounded by the love and light of my flock, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I would protect them with every ounce of strength I had. Together, we would confront the shadows, and together, we would stand strong. But deep within me, a whisper lingered, an echo of the darkness I had once embraced. It served as a chilling reminder that while I had won this battle, the war against despair and evil was far from over. Obsession with an old book. Have you ever stumbled upon something so innocuous, yet it sent a chill down your spine? I often think back to that moment, the day everything changed. It began on a rainy afternoon, the kind that makes you want to curl up with a warm drink and forget the world outside. I had just moved into my late grandmother's old house, a creaking structure full of memories, shadows, and long-forgotten secrets. As I unpacked, I found myself drawn to the attic, a dusty realm I hadn't yet explored. Climbing the rickety staircase, I was greeted by the smell of mothballs and neglect. Sunlight filtered through a grimy window, casting ghostly patterns on the floor. Boxes were strewn about, each holding remnants of lives once lived, old photographs, faded letters, and trinkets that whispered stories of the past. Among the clutter, one object caught my eye, a weathered book with a cracked spine, its cover embossed with strange symbols that seemed to twist and pulse as I stared at them. Intrigued, I picked it up. The weight of it felt strange in my hands, as if it held more than just pages. It felt alive. I brushed off the dust and opened it. The pages were yellowed, filled with handwritten notes and illustrations that shifted in my mind like a half-remembered dream. They depicted bizarre rituals and incantations, a language I didn't recognize but felt oddly familiar. My heart raced as I realized I had stumbled onto something extraordinary, or perhaps something terrifying. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a sudden chill in the air, a gust of wind that seemed to swirl around me, even though the attic window was shut tight. A creeping unease settled in the pit of my stomach, but my curiosity overpowered my instincts. I read a few lines aloud, my voice trembling as the ancient words slipped off my tongue. The moment I did, the air thickened around me, crackling with an energy I couldn't understand. I felt an odd sensation, as if a whisper had brushed against my ear, urging me to continue. But it wasn't just any whisper, it felt almost like a voice that came from within me, a gentle prod that began to awaken something deep inside, something I couldn't yet comprehend. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, flickering out of sight whenever I turned to look. I attributed it to the eerie nature of the house and my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I became obsessed with the book, spending every free moment absorbed in its pages, attempting to decipher the mysteries within. The more I read, the more I felt an unsettling connection to the text, as if it was alive and calling to me. Late at night, I would lie in bed, the book resting on my nightstand, its presence heavy in the stillness. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the faintest echo of whispers lingering in the silence. It was as if the words were seeping into my dreams, intertwining with my thoughts, wrapping around my mind like a vine. I could hear them calling me, pulling me deeper into their world. One evening, I decided to try one of the rituals written in the book, convinced that it was merely a harmless exploration of my curiosity. The instructions were simple enough, a series of phrases that felt rhythmic on my tongue. I set the mood, dimmed lights, flickering candles, and the solitude of the night surrounding me. As I recited the words, a strange sensation enveloped me. The shadows in my room deepened, swirling like ink in water. I felt a rush of energy and intoxicating power coursing through me. The air became thick, heavy with expectation, as if the very walls were holding their breath. My heart raced, exhilaration and dread intertwining in a chaotic dance. But then, a moment of clarity struck me. I had crossed a line I didn't fully understand. The excitement morphed into panic as the whispers grew louder, more demanding. They clawed at the edges of my consciousness, and I felt an overwhelming urge to stop, to close the book and retreat into the safety of the mundane. I slammed the book shut, my breath quickening. The shadows retreated, but the echo of those words lingered, a haunting reminder of what I had summoned. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What had I awakened? What power had I dared to toy with? As the days passed, I felt a change within me, a subtle shift, like a tide pulling away from the shore. The familiar comfort of my surroundings began to morph into something foreign. I felt restless, anxious, as if I were on the brink of something monumental yet terrifying. That evening, I decided to reach for the book again, despite the warnings ringing in my mind. I felt an irresistible pull, as though it were calling my name, enticing me to uncover more of its secrets. I opened it to a random page and began to read. This time, the words seemed to leap off the page, dancing in the flickering candlelight. My heart raced, but there was an undeniable thrill in the air, a promise of revelation. Little did I know, the true horror of my discovery was yet to come, lurking just beyond the veil of understanding. As I continued to read, the words began to take on a life of their own, weaving intricate patterns in my mind. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, each phrase echoing in my ears like a chant. I felt as though I were not merely reading the book, but becoming a part of its twisted narrative. With each incantation, I was pulled deeper into its enigmatic grasp, and a growing sense of dread began to intertwine with my curiosity. One night, I found myself alone in the house, the wind howling outside like a chorus of mournful spirits. I decided to conduct a more elaborate ritual, convinced that I could tap into the book's full potential. I gathered candles, arranged them in a circle, and placed the book at its center. The dim light flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows on the walls, as if the house itself were watching. I recited the words slowly, deliberately, feeling their power resonate within me. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and for a moment, I felt invincible, as if I could summon forces beyond my understanding. But then, something shifted. The shadows deepened, the whispers grew louder, and a sense of foreboding swept over me like a cold wave. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, shaking me from my trance. My heart raced as I turned to see what had caused the noise. The old window in the attic, which I was certain I had closed, stood ajar, letting in a chilling breeze that sent shivers down my spine. I rushed to shut it, my pulse pounding in my ears, but the moment I did, I noticed something strange in the reflection of the glass. For a brief second, I saw a figure behind me, a fleeting shadow that vanished the moment I turned around. My breath caught in my throat, and panic surged through me. Was it a trick of the light? My mind racing, I shook off the feeling and returned to the ritual, determined not to let fear deter me. As I resumed my reading, I felt an unexpected surge of emotion, a blend of exhilaration and fear. I could almost feel the energy from the book flowing through my veins, intoxicating me. But just as quickly, a wave of doubt washed over me. What was I awakening? What price would I pay for this knowledge? In the following days, the occurrences became increasingly unsettling. Objects in the house shifted mysteriously, and shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. The feeling of being watched intensified. At night, I would wake up to whispers that echoed in the darkness, their tone insistent, like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. During one particularly restless night, I decided to confide in my friend, Alex. We had known each other since childhood, and I trusted him with my darkest thoughts. Over coffee, I recounted my experience with the book, how it had consumed my thoughts and dreams. His expression shifted from concern to disbelief as I shared the bizarre rituals and the odd sensations that accompanied them. Maybe it's just a coincidence, he suggested, trying to reassure me. You've been through a lot lately. Moving, adjusting to a new place, it's bound to mess with your head. But I could tell he was uneasy, his gaze flickering to the shadows that danced along the cafe walls. Just be careful, okay? Books can be powerful, especially old ones. There's a reason some things are best left buried. His words stuck with me, igniting a spark of fear. That night, I locked the book in my desk drawer, hoping that distance would quell its pull. But as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the silence like a haunting lullaby, urging me to return. Eventually, I succumbed. I pried open the drawer, pulled out the book, and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The incantation there seemed to pulse with a dark allure, and despite the warnings echoing in my mind, I began to read. As I spoke the words, a heavy fog enveloped the room, thick and suffocating. The shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, and the atmosphere shifted, becoming charged with a foreboding energy. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a drumbeat of impending doom. Then, just as I reached the final phrase, a deafening silence fell over the room. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an overwhelming stillness that felt suffocating. My breath quickened as I looked around, panic rising within me. Had I summoned something I couldn't control? And then, as if in answer to my unspoken fears, a mirror hanging on the wall shattered, sending shards scattering across the floor. The sound echoed through the house, a harbinger of the chaos that was to come. I stumbled back, fear gripping me like a vice. The shadows twisted in the corners of my room, whispering secrets that were no longer just echoes in my mind. In that moment, I understood the true horror of my obsession. The book had awakened something within me, something dark and insatiable. The line between curiosity and madness blurred, and I felt the weight of its influence pressing down on my very soul. The aftermath of the shattered mirror left me reeling. I crouched on the floor, trembling, my heart racing as the shards glistened like teeth in the dim light. The oppressive silence pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I could feel something lurking just beyond my sight, something that thrived in the darkness I had unwittingly unleashed. Desperate to regain control, I hastily gathered the shards, tossing them into a dustbin. Each piece felt like a memory lost, a fragment of my sanity slipping away. I could almost hear the whispers again, mocking me for my naivety, urging me to delve deeper into the chaos I had stirred. The book lay open on my desk, its pages flipping gently as if beckoning me closer. I fought against the compulsion to read, knowing that each word would pull me further into its abyss. Yet, the allure was too powerful to resist. The following night, despite my better judgment, I returned to the attic. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to unlock the next secret. I set up my makeshift altar again, candles flickering, shadows dancing, the atmosphere heavy with expectation. The book rested at the center, calling to me with an insistent pull. I opened it and read the next passage, my voice trembling but resolute. As I recited the words, I felt a jolt, as though an unseen force wrapped around me. The shadows morphed, swirling in a tempest of darkness, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed a figure in the corner of the room. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. A chill ran down my spine, and I faltered in my reading, but the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with an unsettling sense of dread. Then, an unsettling thought struck me. Was I truly alone? I could feel the weight of something watching, lurking in the shadows. Panic surged within me, and I decided to stop, to close the book and retreat back to the safety of my bed. But just as I reached to close it, the room filled with a low hum, vibrating through my bones. The air crackled, and I could feel a presence growing stronger, more tangible. Before I knew it, I was overwhelmed by a surge of emotion, a mix of fear and exhilaration that compelled me to continue. The book's power coursed through me like wildfire, igniting a hunger for knowledge that I couldn't resist. I pressed on, reciting incantation after incantation, feeling the boundaries of reality blur. But with every word, the shadows deepened. The atmosphere grew charged, the air thick with an unnameable tension. I felt a darkness encroaching on my senses, twisting the familiar into something grotesque. I could hear distant screams echoing through the corridors of my mind, but I brushed them aside, lost in the thrill of the unknown. Then came the moment I had feared, a revelation that brought the weight of reality crashing down upon me. The figure reappeared, but this time it stood before me, a swirling mass of darkness with human-like features. Its eyes bore into mine, and I felt my will begin to wane, replaced by an all-consuming fear. "Why have you summoned me?" it hissed, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You are not ready for the truths I carry." A jolt of terror surged through me. I had expected something terrible, but the reality of the confrontation left me paralyzed. I attempted to close the book, but it felt glued to my hands, the words pulling me deeper into its grasp. The entity loomed closer, and I could feel the cold emanating from its presence. "I have waited for someone like you," it whispered, an unsettling smile spreading across its face. "You possess a yearning for knowledge that can only lead to your undoing." In that moment, everything I had experienced, the whispers, the shadows, the book itself, came crashing down like a tidal wave of realization. I had awakened something far beyond my understanding, a force that thrived on my fear and curiosity. I tried to muster the strength to resist, to escape the suffocating pull of the book and the entity, but I felt my resolve crumbling. "Let me show you," it murmured, its voice smooth and hypnotic. The shadows twisted and curled around us, closing in like a shroud. I felt myself being pulled closer, the darkness creeping into my mind. The book began to vibrate, its pages flipping wildly, revealing secrets I had never dared to imagine. Suddenly, I was no longer in the attic. I found myself in a vast, dark expanse, an endless void where reality and nightmares intertwined. The entity stood beside me, its presence a chilling reminder of my own folly. I could hear whispers, thousands of voices, each sharing tales of despair and longing, of souls ensnared by the insatiable hunger for knowledge. "You see," it said, gesturing to the swirling void. "This is what awaits those who delve too deep." The pursuit of knowledge can lead to enlightenment, but it can also lead to madness. As the voices crescendoed, I felt my own thoughts drown beneath their weight. Panic surged through me as I fought to maintain my sense of self. The book, the whispers, the figure, they had woven themselves into my very being, threatening to unravel the fabric of my reality. Desperation clawed at my insides, and in a moment of clarity, I remembered Alex's warning. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I shouted the incantation I had read earlier, a last-ditch effort to sever the connection. "Leave me!" I cried, my voice echoing in the void. "You will not take me." The entity recoiled, its smile twisting into a snarl. "You cannot escape what you have summoned," it hissed, darkness swirling around us. But I pressed on, repeating the words with fervor, drawing strength from the very act of defiance. The void began to fracture, light piercing through the shadows as the entity shrieked in rage. I felt the world spinning around me, the grip of the darkness loosening as I fought to return to my own reality. Suddenly, I was back in the attic, gasping for air. The candles had extinguished, leaving only the faintest glow of moonlight filtering through the window. The book lay open before me, its pages fluttering gently, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The encounter had changed me, etched a mark deep within my psyche. I glanced at the book, its symbols dancing in the dim light, and realized that the true horror was not just what I had awakened, but the darkness that now resided within me. In the days that followed my harrowing encounter, a haunting stillness enveloped my life. The shadows that once flickered at the corners of my vision now seemed to linger, watching and waiting. I tried to convince myself that I was safe, that the darkness had been banished, but deep down, I knew the truth. The book had left its mark, and its whispers still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of my transgression. I went about my daily routine, yet everything felt tainted. The once familiar sounds of the neighborhood, the laughter of children, the rustling leaves, now felt like a distant memory. My friends began to notice my change, particularly Alex. Concern etched on his face, he urged me to talk about what I had experienced, but I remained silent, fearing that I might drag him into my nightmare. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the book's presence any longer, I resolved to return it to the attic. The air felt heavier as I ascended the stairs, each creak of the floorboards echoing my rising anxiety. The attic was dimly lit by the waning sunlight, and as I stepped inside, I felt an eerie sense of foreboding wash over me. I placed the book back in the center of my makeshift altar, determined to sever all ties with it. But as I turned to leave, the wind howled through the window, rattling the panes and stirring the dust in the air. I paused, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was different. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very fabric of reality had shifted. Suddenly, the pages of the book began to flip wildly, as if caught in an unseen gust. A sense of urgency gripped me, and before I could comprehend what was happening, the whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, swirling around me like a storm. I staggered back, feeling the weight of their despair and anger crash over me. "No!" I shouted, desperation lacing my voice. "I won't let you in." But my words fell on deaf ears. The shadows thickened, coiling around me, and I felt myself being drawn back into that void. Panic surged within me as I fought against the pull, but the darkness was relentless, a tide I could not resist. Then, in the midst of the chaos, I saw it, the entity. Its eyes glowed fiercely, and a twisted grin spread across its face. "You thought you could escape," it taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "You awakened me, and now you will serve as my vessel. Stay away from me." I screamed, feeling the terror claw at my insides. But as I spoke, I could feel the darkness seeping into my thoughts, twisting my perception. I could hear the whispers again, drowning out my pleas, weaving tales of despair and hopelessness that threatened to consume me. In that moment of vulnerability, something deep within me flickered to life, a spark of defiance. I remembered the power of the words I had spoken before, how they had almost banished the entity. Summoning every ounce of strength I could muster, I seized the book and began to chant the incantation that had brought me to this point. "Leave me," I cried, my voice shaking but resolute. "You have no power over me." The shadows recoiled, the entity faltering for just a moment as if caught off guard. But it quickly regained its strength, anger flaring in its eyes. "You cannot defy what you have invited into your life," it roared, and the darkness surged forward. In a final act of desperation, I closed my eyes and focused on the light within me, the light of my memories, my friends, my love for life. I imagined it growing brighter, pushing against the encroaching shadows. As I chanted, the words became a shield, a barrier against the darkness. The cacophony of whispers intensified, each voice vying for my attention, but I held firm. I could feel the power of the incantation surging, my voice growing stronger, drowning out the darkness. I opened my eyes, and the attic was flooded with light, illuminating the shadows that had once felt so suffocating. With one final cry, I declared, "I banish you. You have no hold over me." The entity screamed, a sound that resonated through the very core of my being as the shadows shattered like glass around me. I felt the darkness recede, swirling away into nothingness, leaving behind only silence. Breathless, I collapsed to the floor, the weight of the book heavy in my hands. As the last remnants of the shadows faded, I realized that I had won, but at a cost. I had faced the darkness within myself, and though I had emerged victorious, I was forever changed. The book lay before me, its pages now blank, devoid of the power it once held. I knew then that I could never return to who I was before. The whispers that had haunted me were gone, but their echoes would linger, a reminder of my brush with the unknown. With trembling hands, I gathered the book and made my way to the window. I opened it wide, feeling the fresh night air wash over me like a cleansing balm. I cast the book out into the darkness, watching as it disappeared into the night, a final act of release. As I turned to leave the attic, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The air was lighter, the oppressive atmosphere dissipating with each step. But deep within, I knew I would always carry a piece of that darkness, a reminder of the line I had crossed and the journey I had endured. In the days that followed, I resumed my life, but the world felt different, more vibrant, more precious. The shadows no longer haunted me, but I remained vigilant, aware of the delicate balance between light and dark. And every now and then, when the wind would whisper through the trees, I would pause, remembering the power of the book and the darkness it contained. It was a lesson I would carry with me forever, a testament to the strength found in defiance and the light that could shine even in the depths of despair. Black cat. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be haunted by something you couldn't quite grasp? Something so insidious that it infiltrates the very fabric of your existence, twisting the mundane into something grotesque? I used to dismiss those questions, laughing off the irrational fears of the superstitious. But that was before I met the black cat. It was a typical Thursday evening, the sun barely setting behind the suburban sprawl, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. I was walking home from work, my mind buzzing with the mundane concerns of daily life, the deadlines looming, the laundry waiting, the dinner I had yet to prepare. The air was crisp, a hint of autumn creeping in, making me shiver slightly. I was so absorbed in my thoughts that I hardly noticed the figure lurking at the edge of my vision until it darted across the sidewalk. A black cat. Its fur was sleek, glistening in the fading light, and its yellow eyes glowed with an eerie luminescence. For a moment, time stood still. I froze, watching as the creature paused, turning its head to meet my gaze. There was something unsettling about its stare. It felt as if it were peering into my soul, dissecting my very essence. I shook my head, dismissing the sensation as mere imagination, and continued walking. Little did I know that this chance encounter would unravel the threads of my reality. The first night passed uneventfully, yet a strange anxiety nestled deep within me. As I lay in bed, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. The cat's eyes. The way it had seemed to beckon me, calling out from the depths of my subconscious. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but it eluded me, leaving me tossing and turning, wrapped in a cocoon of dread. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that black cat lingered, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I began to notice odd occurrences around my house, objects misplaced, shadows lurking just out of sight, and a feeling of being watched even when I was alone. My friends and family brushed off my concerns, attributing them to stress or fatigue. "You're just imagining things," they'd say with a chuckle, patting me on the back. But I knew better. Something was wrong. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a soft scratching at the door. My heart raced, and I paused, unsure whether to open it or ignore it. The scratching continued, insistent and rhythmic. Gathering my courage, I creaked the door open, half expecting to find a stray animal or an errant delivery. Instead, there was nothing. Just the empty darkness of the porch and the oppressive silence that seemed to blanket everything. I closed the door, shaking my head in frustration. Perhaps I was going mad. But as I turned back into the house, a chill swept through me. The air thickened, and the familiar sounds of my home, the creaking floorboards, the distant hum of the refrigerator, shifted into something alien. That's why I saw it. In the corner of my eye, a shadow darted past the window, and I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the evening light filtering through the curtains. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of panic. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by stress and fatigue. But as I returned to the kitchen, the scratching returned, louder this time, accompanied by a soft, haunting meow that sent shivers down my spine. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself, fighting back the growing dread. But deep down, I felt it, the cold tendrils of fear wrapping around my mind, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. That night, sleep eluded me once more. The shadows in my room seemed to stretch and contort, morphing into figures that danced along the walls. I buried my face in the pillow, desperate to block out the encroaching darkness. But as the hours dragged on, I could swear I felt a presence lurking just beyond my line of sight, watching, waiting. I finally dozed off in the early hours of the morning, only to be jolted awake by a loud crash. My heart raced as I shot up, scanning the room for the source of the sound. My breath caught in my throat when I spotted it, a vase lying shattered on the floor, pieces glinting in the moonlight. I hadn't even noticed it was gone from the table. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my phone to check the time. It was just past 3 in the morning. A time steeped in folklore, often referred to as the witching hour, a time when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. This was just a coincidence, I told myself. But the unease grew. I could feel it, a weight pressing down on me. The black cat lingered in my mind, a specter haunting my thoughts. It was as if its presence was a harbinger of the strange occurrences plaguing my life, a catalyst igniting my fears into a raging inferno. As days passed, I became increasingly paranoid. I avoided walking home at night, choosing to stay late at work instead. But still, the feeling of being followed clung to me, a constant companion. I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. My once safe and comforting home had transformed into a prison, each shadow a potential threat, each creak a reminder of my fragility. Then one evening, while scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon an article about black cats and their associations with the supernatural. I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that settled over me as I read the stories, people claiming to be cursed after encounters with black cats, their lives spiraling into chaos. I laughed nervously at the absurdity, but deep down, I felt a chill run down my spine. Maybe I was cursed. Maybe the black cat had marked me, summoned by some dark force to ensnare my soul. I had to know more. I spent the following days consumed by a mix of dread and curiosity. My usual routine devolved into a frantic search for answers. I scoured the internet, digging into local folklore and stories of hauntings, black cats, and supernatural encounters. Each tale echoed my own experience, feeding my paranoia. I became convinced that the black cat was more than just a chance encounter, it was a warning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across my living room, I decided to visit the local library. It was a place steeped in history, filled with dusty books and the quiet whispers of stories long forgotten. Surely, I could find something there that would shed light on my situation. The moment I entered, the familiar scent of aged paper enveloped me, grounding me momentarily in a sense of normalcy. I wandered through the narrow aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books until I found a section dedicated to folklore and the supernatural. The librarian, an elderly woman with wispy gray hair and sharp eyes, watched me with a knowing look as I pulled out several volumes. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon a particularly intriguing book titled Whispers of the Night, the Supernatural in Modern Folklore. My heart raced as I flipped through the pages, absorbing tales of misfortune and despair tied to the appearance of black cats. Each story was more chilling than the last, weaving a narrative of curses, hauntings, and tragic fates. One account stood out, a woman who had encountered a black cat and, soon after, began experiencing vivid nightmares and strange occurrences in her home. She described shadows darting in her peripheral vision and whispers in the dead of night, sounds that echoed my own experiences. It was as if the author had plucked the words directly from my mind. That night, I returned home with the book clutched tightly in my arms, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. I settled on the couch, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. As I read, I felt a growing unease, a tightening in my chest. The stories resonated deep within me, and the familiar sensation of being watched crept back. Hours slipped by as I immersed myself in the book, but just as I reached the end, a soft tapping at the window made me jump. I glanced up, heart racing, and froze. Outside, the black cat sat, its eyes glowing like two fiery coals in the night. My pulse quickened. It was back. I stumbled to my feet, heart pounding against my ribs as I approached the window. The cat remained still, its gaze unwavering, as if challenging me to confront it. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. I could feel the weight of its presence, pressing against the glass, seeping into my mind. I hesitated, my fingers hovering above the window latch. Should I let it in? I had heard that inviting a black cat into your home was a sign of bad luck, a portal to misfortune. But part of me was inexplicably drawn to it, as if it were a key to understanding the darkness that had begun to envelop my life. As if sensing my inner turmoil, the cat let out a low, mournful meow, sending chills down my spine. I recoiled, stepping back from the window, the book slipping from my grasp and landing with a thud on the floor. The sound echoed in the silence, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run. But where could I go? This thing had invaded my life, and I was trapped. I turned away, heart racing as I hurried to the kitchen, desperate to escape its gaze. But the scratching returned, louder this time, echoing through the house. My mind raced. It was as if the cat was trying to communicate something, urging me to understand. But what? The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided looking out the window, convinced the black cat was watching me, lurking just out of sight. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the growing dread that clung to me. But the more I tried to escape it, the more it tightened its grip. Then came the night that changed everything. I had finally managed to drift off into a restless sleep when I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the noise growing louder. Someone was in the house. Panic surged through me, and I shot up, glancing around the darkened room. My breath caught in my throat as I remembered the broken vase. Had I locked the door? I grabbed my phone, the screen casting a soft glow that barely pierced the darkness. I tiptoed to the bedroom door, listening intently. The footsteps continued, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the hallway. I clutched the phone tightly, my heart pounding in my ears, the weight of fear pressing down on me. As I opened the door, the sound ceased. A suffocating silence enveloped me, and I felt as if the very air had thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud. I took a cautious step into the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pressed on, drawn by an unseen force. I made my way to the living room, every shadow seeming to pulse and shift, playing tricks on my mind. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing, just the emptiness of my home. I sighed, a mixture of relief and frustration flooding through me. But as I turned to leave, I felt a cold draft wash over me. My breath hitched, and I glanced back, the hairs on my neck standing on end. And then I saw it. The black cat, sitting atop the bookshelf, its eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. It shattered against the floor, shards scattering everywhere. But the cat didn't move, it merely watched, an eerie calm in the chaos. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. It felt as if the creature was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each beat of my heart. I backed away slowly, desperate to escape its gaze, and that's when I noticed something unusual, a reflection in the broken glass. My own terrified expression stared back at me, but behind it, something shifted in the shadows, a darker shape that made my blood run cold. I turned and fled to my room, slamming the door shut and pressing my back against it, as if that would keep the darkness at bay. I could hear it then, soft whispers, like the rustling of leaves, coming from the other side of the door. The black cat had followed me. Panic surged through me as I pressed my back against the door, the whispers growing louder, curling around my mind like tendrils of smoke. The black cat was outside, its presence undeniable and suffocating. I could hear it now, scratching at the door, as if trying to claw its way in, eager to breach the fragile barrier I had created. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice trembling, echoing against the walls of my dimly lit sanctuary. But the only response was a low, guttural meow, sending a fresh wave of dread through me. I turned to the window, desperate for some semblance of escape, but the curtain was drawn tight, trapping me in this nightmare. Time seemed to stretch, each second a painful reminder of my isolation. I fumbled for my phone, desperately scrolling through my contacts for someone, anyone, to call. But deep down, I knew there was no one who could save me from this. The weight of the supernatural pressed down on me, a suffocating fog that blurred the line between reality and madness. Suddenly, the whispers shifted, morphing into a haunting melody, a lullaby I couldn't quite place. It was familiar yet distorted, twisting memories of my childhood into something grotesque. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the sound away, but it lingered, wrapping around my thoughts, tugging at the edges of my sanity. Then, a loud crash echoed from the living room, shattering the silence and jolting me back to reality. My heart raced, and I hesitated, torn between fear and the need to know what was happening. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slowly opened the door, the hinges creaking in protest. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that weighed heavily in the air. I ventured cautiously towards the living room, my footsteps barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, every shadow feeling alive, pulsing with an unseen energy. As I entered the living room, the sight before me made my blood run cold. The furniture was overturned, books scattered across the floor, and the shattered lamp lay among the debris, glass glinting ominously in the dim light. But it was the presence in the center of the chaos that held my gaze. The black cat sat calmly in the midst of the wreckage, staring at me with those piercing yellow eyes, unblinking and unfazed by the turmoil surrounding it. It was as if the destruction was nothing to it, a mere plaything in its sinister game. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine, and I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. "Get out!" I shouted, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. But the cat remained still, watching me with an unsettling calmness. I could feel its gaze bore into my very soul, and I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just a cat, it was something else, something dark and malevolent. As if sensing my thoughts, the creature shifted slightly, and I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the room, extinguishing the flickering candlelight. The shadows deepened, stretching across the walls like claws reaching for me. My heart raced, pounding in my ears, as I took a step back. In that moment, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, yet somehow clear as day. "Join us," the words echoed through the darkness, chilling me to the bone. I glanced around, searching for the source, but the room remained empty, save for the cat and the remnants of my once cozy home. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The cat remained silent, but its eyes seemed to glimmer with an ancient understanding. Fear washed over me, a tidal wave crashing against the walls of my sanity. I turned to flee back to my room, but the shadows moved with me, closing in, blocking my escape. Panic set in. I darted to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. I twisted the handle, pulling with all my might, but it was as if an unseen force held it shut. "Let me out!" I screamed, desperation clawing at my throat. But the cat merely watched, its gaze steady and unyielding. In a moment of sheer terror, I backed away, my mind racing for a solution. I remembered the book I had found at the library. There had to be something in it that could help me understand what was happening. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I dashed back to my room, the oppressive darkness chasing me, the whispers echoing in my ears. I scrambled to the bookshelf, desperately rifling through the pages of Whispers of the Night. The words blurred together as I searched for anything that might explain the cat's presence, something that could help me banish the darkness closing in on me. Then, amidst the chaos of my thoughts, I found it, a passage about an ancient ritual meant to protect against malevolent spirits. My heart raced as I read the words, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within me. It was risky, but I had to try. As I gathered the necessary items, a candle, salt, and a small mirror, I could feel the atmosphere shift around me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if sensing my intentions. I set the items on the floor, forming a protective circle, and lit the candle, its warm glow flickering in the encroaching darkness. "By the light of this flame, I banish you," I shouted, my voice steady despite the tremors of fear coursing through me. I poured the salt in a circle around the candle, and for a moment the shadows receded, the atmosphere lightening. But just as quickly, the air turned cold, and the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a tempest. "You cannot escape," they taunted, a chorus of voices that echoed through the walls of my home. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows creeping closer, hungry for my fear. I raised the mirror, its surface reflecting the candlelight, and stared into it, searching for the creature lurking just beyond the threshold of my perception. In the glass, I caught a glimpse of something dark, a swirling mass of shadows, flickering and writhing as if it were alive. The cat appeared in the reflection, standing right behind me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. "You belong to us," it hissed, the words reverberating through the room like a thunderclap. My heart raced, and I felt a surge of terror that threatened to consume me. "No!" I screamed, my voice breaking. I focused all my energy on the candle flame, willing it to grow brighter, to push back the darkness. But the shadows surged forward, wrapping around me like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, splintering the reflection, and the candle flickered violently before extinguishing, plunging me into darkness. I felt the coldness seep into my bones, a chilling despair washing over me. The whispers intensified, drowning out my thoughts, wrapping me in a cocoon of fear. And then, just as I thought I would be swallowed by the darkness, I heard a voice, a clear, piercing cry that cut through the chaos. "Awaken!" With a jolt, I found myself back in my bedroom, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The shadows were gone, replaced by the soft glow of morning light streaming through the window. Had it all been a dream? A figment of my imagination? But as I sat up, the memories flooded back, the cat, the whispers, the darkness. I glanced around, but my heart sank as I noticed a broken mirror shards scattered across the floor. It hadn't been a dream. I was still trapped in this nightmare, and I could feel it, the weight of the black cat's gaze lingering in the air, a reminder that it was still out there, waiting for its moment to strike. The morning light filtering through my window did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I stumbled out of bed, the remnants of my nightmare still clinging to me like a second skin. My heart raced as I tiptoed through the house, half expecting the shadows to leap out and engulf me once more. The broken shards of the mirror glinted ominously on the floor, a stark reminder of the darkness I had faced. I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had changed something within me. I felt fragile, as if the very fabric of reality had thinned, exposing me to the malevolence lurking just beyond sight. I went to the kitchen, desperately needing to ground myself in the mundane, but the familiar surroundings felt foreign, tainted by the supernatural. As I brewed coffee, I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. My heart plummeted as I turned to face it. There it was, the black cat, sitting on the porch, its eyes locked onto mine, unblinking and all-knowing. A shiver ran down my spine. I had hoped that the morning light would chase away the shadows, but instead, it seemed to amplify them. I hurried to grab my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts, considering calling a friend or even the local paranormal investigators. But the fear of sounding crazy held me back. What could I say? "Hey, I'm being haunted by a cat?" Instead, I decided to go back to the library. I needed answers, something concrete to help me understand the strange events that had unfolded. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, heart pounding as I walked past the black cat. It didn't move, its gaze felt like an anchor, heavy and unyielding. Once at the library, I dove back into research, poring over old newspapers, records, and books. I found stories of others who had encountered the black cat and experienced strange occurrences afterward. It was always the same, a series of misfortunes, increasing dread, and in some cases, disappearances. One article caught my eye, a young woman who had lived in my neighborhood years ago, who had vanished without a trace shortly after a similar encounter with a black cat. The chilling similarities made my blood run cold. I had to confront this darkness before it consumed me, but how? Days turned into restless nights, each one a blur of shadows and whispers. I avoided sleep whenever possible, terrified of what awaited me in my dreams. I became a hollow shell of my former self, existing in a world where the line between reality and nightmare blurred with each passing moment. Then, late one night, as I lay wide awake in bed, the familiar scratching returned. It was a soft, persistent sound that gnawed at my nerves. I clenched my fists, determined not to give in to fear. I threw the covers off and marched to the window, yanking it open. The cat was there, perched on the ledge, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. "What do you want?" I shouted into the darkness. "Why won't you leave me alone?" In response, the cat let out a mournful meow, and suddenly the air around me shifted. The temperature dropped, and I felt a rush of cold wind sweep through the room, as if the very essence of the night had come alive. My heart raced, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Then came the whispers, clearer now, more insistent. "Join us, join us." I felt a pull, a dark urge to give in, to surrender to the call of the shadows. My vision blurred, the edges of reality distorting as I struggled to stay grounded. I shook my head violently, trying to dispel the encroaching darkness. "No!" I screamed, my voice cutting through the heavy air. "I won't let you take me." But the shadows only laughed, a cacophony of voices swirling around me. "You cannot resist. You are already one of us." Just then, I caught sight of something moving behind the cat, a figure emerging from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. It was the young woman from the article, the one who had disappeared all those years ago. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, as if she were trapped between worlds. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "You must help us, before it's too late." I stumbled back, horrified. "What do you mean? How can I help you?" But she only shook her head, fading into the shadows, her presence dissipating like mist. The air grew heavier, and I felt the pull of the shadows tighten around me. I was running out of time. Determined to break free from this cycle, I recalled the ritual I had read about, the protective circle that could shield me from the malevolent forces. I had to confront the cat, to face whatever darkness it represented, and banish it once and for all. I dashed to the living room, gathering the items again, the candle, the salt, and the mirror fragments. My hands trembled as I arranged them on the floor, forming a protective barrier. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm, but I pushed through the fear. "By the light of this flame, I banish you," I shouted, lighting the candle with a match. The flame flickered to life, illuminating the darkness with a warm glow. The shadows hesitated, recoiling at the light. The black cat appeared in the doorway, its eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice echoing through the room. "You belong to us." "No!" I cried, my voice steadying. "I will not be a prisoner in my own life. I choose to be free." With every ounce of strength I could muster, I poured the salt in a circle around the candle, the grains glistening like tiny diamonds in the dim light. The shadows writhed, shrieking in protest, but I held my ground. I raised the mirror, forcing myself to look into it. The reflection was dark, the swirling mass of shadows closing in around me. But I focused on the light of the candle, willing it to grow stronger, to banish the darkness once and for all. "Leave me!" I shouted, directing my energy toward the cat. "You have no power over me." The cat let out a spine-chilling howl, the sound reverberating through the room as the shadows surged forward, but the light from the candle blazed brighter, pushing them back. The whispers turned to wails, a cacophony of voices clamoring in despair. And then, just as the darkness threatened to engulf me, I felt a surge of warmth radiate from the candle. The shadows recoiled, and the black cat let out a final, piercing cry before dissolving into the ether, leaving only silence in its wake. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, the weight of the shadows lifting from my chest. The room was flooded with light, the oppressive darkness that had haunted me for so long finally dissipating. But just as I thought I was free, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned slowly, heart pounding, as I caught sight of a new figure emerging from the darkness, another cat, identical to the one I had banished, but this one was not alone. It was surrounded by a pack of shadowy figures, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. And as they closed in around me, I realized with dawning horror that this battle was far from over. Night visit. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced that someone or something was watching you? It's a feeling that burrows deep into your chest, paralyzing you with fear. For weeks now, this has been my nightly reality. It all started innocently enough. I had just moved into a charming, albeit old, house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The creaking floors and the smell of aged wood were strangely comforting, and I found solace in the familiarity of the mundane. My days were filled with unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, a far cry from the ghost stories that haunted my childhood. The first few nights were blissfully normal. I slept soundly, dreaming of new beginnings and a fresh start. Little did I know, my dreams were about to be interrupted by something far more sinister. The first occurrence was subtle. I remember lying in bed, the glow of the moon spilling through my bedroom window, casting soft shadows against the wall. I had just closed my eyes when I felt it, a cold breeze whispering across my skin, sending shivers down my spine. I dismissed it as the wind, reminding myself that old houses often had their quirks. But when I opened my eyes, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, as if the air was charged with an electric tension. I brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue, and drifted back to sleep. But it wasn't just fatigue that lulled me into unconsciousness that night. No, it was the creeping sense of dread that would soon become my unwelcome companion. The next night, the sensation returned. This time, I felt the presence more distinctly, like a shadow lurking just beyond the periphery of my vision. My heart began to race as I squinted into the dim light of my room, hoping to dispel the darkness with a bit of courage. It was a foolish hope, as I soon discovered. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, trembling with uncertainty. Silence engulfed me, thick and suffocating. I lay still, straining to hear anything beyond the sound of my own heartbeat, which now felt like a drum echoing in the vast emptiness. Then I saw it, a figure, dark and indistinct, standing beside my bed. My breath hitched in my throat, frozen in terror. It was as if it was waiting for me to react, to acknowledge its existence. The shape seemed to shift and undulate, as though the darkness itself was alive and breathing. I wanted to scream, to leap from the bed and run, but my body was paralyzed, caught in the grip of an overwhelming fear. As the figure loomed closer, an icy dread seeped into my bones. I could feel its energy, a cold, malevolent force that snaked through the air like tendrils of smoke. I could hardly comprehend what was happening. Was this a dream? A trick of the mind? Yet, there it was, undeniable and real. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them again, it would be gone. The seconds stretched into an eternity, and finally, the darkness receded. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding like a war drum. The room was empty. Just me, the shadows, and the flickering light of the street lamp outside. I sat up, drenched in sweat, my mind racing. What had I just seen? Was it merely a figment of my imagination or something far more sinister? The following nights were a blur of sleeplessness and anxiety. Each time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the figure, its presence lurking just beyond the edge of my consciousness. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, the byproduct of moving and settling into a new place. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something that twisted the very fabric of my reality. The shadows began to take on a life of their own, growing darker and more oppressive. I felt an inexplicable urge to keep the lights on, to ward off whatever malevolence lurked in the corners of my room. I surrounded myself with familiar things, photographs, trinkets, and books, anything to bring comfort. But the more I fought against the darkness, the more it seemed to cling to me, wrapping around my thoughts like a suffocating shroud. One night, I decided to confront my fears. I set up my camera, intending to capture evidence of whatever haunted me. With every click of the shutter, I hoped to banish the specter that invaded my nights. I arranged the room meticulously, ensuring that every angle was covered, every shadow examined. I felt a mix of determination and dread, a fragile resolve to reclaim my peace. As I lay in bed, the camera trained on the darkness, I could feel my pulse quickening. I focused on the lens, hoping that the mere act of observing would force the entity to reveal itself. Hours passed, and just as I began to drift off, a sound jolted me awake. It was a soft whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a distant storm. I sat up, heart racing, the camera still poised and ready. "Is anyone there?" I called into the stillness, the words trembling on my lips. The room remained silent, but then, slowly, the shadows deepened. I could see the figure emerging once again, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of my dimly lit room. My heart dropped. This time, I could make out features, sunken eyes, a twisted smile that stretched unnaturally across its face. I froze, unable to look away as the entity moved closer, a sinister presence that drew nearer with every beat of my heart. I gripped the camera tighter, but the shutter button felt miles away. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted in place, ensnared by the entity's gaze. The whisper returned, clearer now, resonating deep within my soul. It was a voice that echoed my darkest fears, the very essence of dread. And in that moment, as the figure loomed above me, I knew this was no ordinary nightmare. This was a warning, a sinister invitation to a world beyond my comprehension. The whispering continued, wrapping around me like an invisible noose. It was an eerie, haunting sound, filled with a promise I dared not understand. "Come to me." It seemed to beckon, weaving through the air and settling deep within my mind. I felt the walls of my sanity begin to crack under the weight of its persistent call. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to turn on every light in the house and drown out the darkness. But there I lay, a prisoner of my own fear, the weight of the figure's presence suffocating me. The camera slid from my fingers, clattering to the floor, breaking the trance and sending the figure reeling back into the shadows. The sudden absence of its gaze was both a relief and a tormenting reminder that it could return at any moment. Heart pounding, I scrambled out of bed and flicked on the light switch, flooding the room with harsh brightness. The shadows retreated, but the feeling of dread lingered, clinging to the edges of my consciousness like a stubborn fog. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. It was just a trick of the mind, I told myself, yet deep down, I knew the truth, something was very wrong. Determined to regain control, I began researching the house's history, desperate to find an explanation for my nightly tormentor. I scoured the internet and local archives, piecing together the fragments of a story long buried. As I delved deeper, a chilling pattern emerged, a string of unsettling events, each one marked by inexplicable disappearances and tragic accidents. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the walls closing in, as if the house itself was a living entity, a vessel for the horrors that had unfolded within. I stumbled upon a name, a previous owner, a woman who had lived alone in the house for decades. Reports described her as a recluse, rarely seen outside her front door. Neighbors whispered of strange noises coming from her home late at night, and there were even tales of flickering lights and shadowy figures moving behind the curtains. Eventually, she had vanished without a trace, leaving the house to decay in silence. As I absorbed the information, a cold chill raced down my spine. It was as if the very walls of the house had absorbed her essence, her despair, and now it was feeding off my own. I tried to dismiss the thoughts swirling in my mind, but I could feel the weight of her presence, as if she was reaching out from the shadows, intertwining her fate with mine. That night, sleep eluded me once more. I lay awake, every creak of the house magnified in the stillness. My eyes darted around the room, searching for the figure that had invaded my dreams. The clock ticked loudly, each second dragging on like an eternity. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the mundane sounds of my surroundings. But every time I closed my eyes, the darkness felt closer, more insistent. As dawn approached, exhaustion began to blur the line between reality and nightmare. I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of consciousness, pulled in multiple directions, one towards sleep, the other towards the haunting whispers that beckoned me. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I was simply adjusting to the new environment. Yet the uncertainty gnawed at me like a persistent parasite. On the following night, I decided to keep the camera beside me, determined to capture whatever darkness awaited me. As I lay in bed, every sound amplified in the stillness, I held the device tightly, ready to document the presence that had become my unwelcome guest. Hours stretched on, and the weight of sleep began to pull at my eyelids. Just as I thought I would drift off, I heard it again, the soft, insistent whisper, now intermingled with a gentle tapping sound, like fingernails scratching against wood. With a jolt, I shot up in bed, gripping the camera with white knuckles. The tapping grew louder, resonating through the walls, echoing the rhythm of my racing heart. I turned the camera towards the door, its lens capturing the expanse of darkness beyond. The shadows seemed to swirl, coiling and twisting as if alive, and I knew, this time, it was not just a figment of my imagination. I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, chilling me to the bone. The temperature dropped, my breath visible in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was close, lurking just beyond my sight. The whisper morphed into a cacophony of voices, a haunting melody that filled my mind with despair and hopelessness. I turned the camera towards the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the outside world, something, anything, familiar to ground me in reality. But the darkness was thick and impenetrable, swallowing the light whole. It felt like a barrier, a separation between me and the world I once knew. I looked back towards my bedroom door, heart hammering in my chest, and that's when I saw it. The figure emerged, more defined than before. It was no longer a mere silhouette, its features were grotesquely exaggerated. I could see the twisted smile etched upon its face, a horrifying juxtaposition to the hollow eyes that bore into my soul. It moved with an unsettling grace, gliding closer, as if gravity held no sway over it. "Come to me," it whispered again, the voice now clearer, resonating with a mocking tone. My instinct screamed at me to flee, to escape this nightmare, but my body was paralyzed, as if caught in a web spun from fear itself. The figure extended its hand, a long, bony finger pointing towards me. "Come to me," it repeated, the command echoing through my mind. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. This was no ordinary encounter. This was a confrontation with something ancient, something that sought to claim me as its own. And in that instant, I knew I had to fight back. I reached for the camera, determined to capture this moment, to prove to myself that I was not losing my mind. I pressed the shutter, the flash illuminating the room in a blinding burst of light. The figure recoiled, momentarily distracted, and in that fleeting moment, I felt a surge of power course through me. But it was short-lived. The light flickered and died, plunging me back into darkness. The figure regained its composure, its smile widening as it moved closer. I felt its icy breath against my skin, a chilling reminder that I was not alone, and that whatever this entity was, it was not going to let me go easily. In that moment, as the figure hovered inches away from me, I felt a surge of primal instinct, a desperate urge to survive. Panic flooded my veins as I fumbled for my phone, hoping to find some source of light. My hands trembled uncontrollably, every muscle in my body screaming for me to act, to escape this horror that had invaded my life. I managed to switch on my phone's flashlight, and the beam cut through the oppressive darkness. The figure flinched, momentarily retreating into the shadows, its expression shifting from curiosity to something more sinister. It was a brief reprieve, but I knew it wouldn't last long. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice wavering as fear clawed at my throat. The words felt hollow in the air, swallowed by the silence that followed. I knew the answer even before it came, a silence so thick it felt like a living entity, a smothering presence that pressed against my chest. The figure stepped forward again, and this time I could see it more clearly. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bony limbs, and its smile twisted in a way that defied the laws of nature. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged teeth, each one a reminder of the horrors that lay beyond the veil of normalcy. "Your fears are my sustenance," it replied, the voice a low growl that resonated in the very marrow of my bones. "You brought me here with your doubt, your despair. I thrive in the shadows of your mind." With each word, I felt a part of me wither, as if the essence of my being was slowly being siphoned away. It was a chilling realization. This entity was not just a figment of my imagination, but a manifestation of my deepest fears, the embodiment of everything I had been trying to suppress. I had to confront it. I had to reclaim my life. As it stepped closer, I took a deep breath, forcing the fear down and calling upon the courage that had been buried beneath layers of anxiety. "You may feed on my fears, but I won't let you control me," I declared, my voice steadier than I felt. In response, the figure laughed, a sound that echoed like thunder, filling the room with a sense of foreboding. "Control is merely an illusion, dear one. You cannot escape what you are." I focused on the light, raising my phone higher, its glow illuminating the figure's face. I had to fight against the darkness, to shine a light on the fears that threatened to consume me. As I confronted my fears, I began to recall moments from my past, failures, regrets, losses. Each memory surged forth like a wave, threatening to drown me in despair. But then, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. These fears, while powerful, were not insurmountable. I remembered times when I had faced challenges and emerged stronger, moments when I had triumphed over adversity. I clung to those memories like lifelines in a stormy sea. "You may be born from my fears," I shouted, the words fueled by determination, "but you do not define me." With that proclamation, I felt the atmosphere shift. The figure recoiled slightly, its form wavering as if it were made of smoke. I seized the opportunity, pressing the flashlight closer, focusing on the shadows that clung to its edges. The entity writhed, a cacophony of whispers swirling around it, each voice a manifestation of my doubt. "Fear me, embrace me," it screamed, the words a desperate plea tinged with rage. "No," I replied, heart racing as I pressed on. "I refuse to be a vessel for your torment." I directed the beam of light at its core, watching as the shadows began to dissipate. The figure's form flickered, its jagged smile faltering for the first time. But just as I felt a glimmer of victory, the room began to tremble. The walls vibrated, the ground shifting beneath me, as if the house itself were protesting against my defiance. Pictures rattled on the walls, and I was thrown off balance, scrambling to keep my footing. In that chaos, I realized I was not just battling the figure, but the very essence of the house, the pain and suffering it had witnessed over the years. The memories of the reclusive woman echoed through my mind, her despair entwined with my own. "I am not alone," I shouted, channeling the energy of those who had come before me, the voices of the forgotten. "I stand for those who cannot." The entity's laughter rang out, but it was tinged with uncertainty now. The shadows began to thin, light pouring in where darkness once reigned. I could feel the energy shift again, the oppressive weight lifting slightly as the figure began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like mist in the morning sun. "You think you can banish me?" it hissed, voice warbling as if caught in a gale. "I will always return." But I refused to back down. I would not let this entity claim another moment of my life. I focused on the light, on the strength of my resolve, and in a final surge of willpower, I commanded, "Begone." With that, the room erupted in a blinding flash, and for a heartbeat, everything was illuminated in pure white light. I felt the energy surge around me, a tempest of power and resolve that coursed through my veins. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone, leaving behind an eerie silence that settled over the room like a blanket. I collapsed onto my bed, breathless, heart racing. The oppressive darkness had lifted, and the figure was gone, at least for now. I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion wash over me, the adrenaline fading as reality began to sink in. I had confronted my fears, but I knew this battle was far from over. The entity would find a way back, it always did. The dawn broke hesitantly, its light spilling into my room, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat up, heart still racing, grappling with the remnants of the encounter. The oppressive weight of the night felt lighter, yet the remnants of fear clung to me like a stubborn shadow. I had faced the figure, confronted my fears, and for now, I had won. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was merely postponed, not finished. Days passed in a strange limbo. I kept the lights on, flooded the house with illumination, and avoided the creeping shadows at all costs. I busied myself with work and mundane tasks, but the whispers still haunted my thoughts, echoing in the quiet moments when I dared to relax. Every creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down my spine, and I was acutely aware of the lurking darkness. Then came the night I would never forget. I had fallen asleep exhausted, lulled by the rhythm of the house settling around me. But sleep was short-lived. I woke abruptly to a sound that sent chills racing down my spine, the unmistakable whisper of my name slithering through the darkness. Come to me, the voice, silky and insistent, wrapped around my mind like a shroud. I jolted upright, my heart pounding violently in my chest. This was no trick of my imagination, it was real and alive, the entity returning with a vengeance. I reached for my phone, the glow providing a thin shield against the encroaching darkness. But when I turned on the light, the room was empty, silent. I took a shaky breath, my mind racing. Had I been too hasty to think I had banished it? Perhaps I had merely angered it, drawing its focus towards me once more. That night, I made a decision. I would confront it again. I had to understand its nature, to uncover the truth behind its torment. Armed with my camera and a resolve that felt tenuous, I prepared myself for what lay ahead. As the hours crept by, I set up a makeshift camp in the living room, surrounding myself with every light source I could find. I gathered candles, lamps, and flashlights, determined to keep the darkness at bay. The house creaked and groaned, the sounds amplifying my unease, but I pressed on, clinging to the hope that I could uncover the truth. Midnight struck, and the atmosphere shifted once more. The temperature dropped, a chill creeping into the air. The shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching across the walls like skeletal fingers. I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on me, a tangible force urging me to give in to my fear. And then it came. The figure materialized before me, its presence swallowing the light around it. The familiar hollow eyes bore into mine, its smile stretching wider, a grotesque caricature of pleasure. "Did you miss me?" it crooned, voice smooth and taunting. "You cannot escape me. I am part of you." I steadied myself, clutching the camera tightly. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice steadying as the adrenaline coursed through me. "What do you want from me?" The figure tilted its head, the smile unwavering. "You know what I want. I want you to embrace the darkness, to acknowledge your fears." It was a challenge, a taunt designed to break me down. I took a deep breath, pushing aside the tremors of doubt that threatened to creep in. "I will not let you control me," I asserted, even as my mind whirled with memories of failure and regret, the moments I had tried to bury. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "You think you are strong? You have only begun to scratch the surface of your own darkness." It stepped closer, and I felt the familiar chill wrap around me, a physical manifestation of my own fears. In that moment, I had a realization. This entity thrived on my fear, but it was also a reflection of my innermost struggles. It represented all the moments I had allowed doubt to seep into my life, the failures I had clung to. I had been running from my fears, but perhaps the true path lay in facing them head-on. I lifted my camera, snapping a picture as the flash illuminated the room once more. The figure flinched, momentarily disrupted, and I seized the opportunity. "You are not my master," I yelled, the words spilling out in a surge of defiance. Suddenly, I was struck by a wave of emotion, pain, sadness, loss, flooding my senses. The figure shuddered, the shadows around it swirling in a chaotic dance. "No! You cannot do this," it screeched, the confidence wavering in its voice. "I can and I will," I declared, forcing myself to remember the moments of strength I had found in vulnerability, the ways I had overcome my past. I concentrated on those memories, letting them build within me, fueling the light that was pushing against the darkness. With each passing moment, the figure began to dissolve, the shadows collapsing in on themselves. "You are nothing without me," it howled, the voice growing weaker as the light enveloped it. But I held firm. "You are a part of my past, not my future. I choose to move forward." With one last surge of energy, I directed all my focus towards the entity, commanding it to leave. The light flared, bathing the room in a brilliant glow as the figure writhed in agony, its form finally disintegrating into nothingness. Silence followed, a profound stillness that filled the air, leaving behind an emptiness that echoed with possibility. I stood there, trembling, heart racing, but the weight of the entity's presence had lifted. I had faced it, acknowledged it, and in doing so, had reclaimed my power. As I looked around the now quiet room, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I realized that the entity would never truly be gone. It was a part of my journey, a testament to my struggles and resilience. But now, I could choose how to respond to it. I was no longer a victim of my fears. I had become the master of my own fate. The shadows still lingered in the corners of the room, a reminder of the battle I had fought, but they no longer held the same power over me. I had faced the darkness, and though it would always be a part of me, I had chosen to embrace the light. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, illuminating the space with a warm glow, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I was ready to move forward, ready to face whatever challenges awaited me. The night was over, and with it, the grip of the shadows had finally begun to loosen. The secret room in the mansion. Have you ever wondered what secrets a house can hold? What if the walls could speak, revealing the whispers of the past? This thought raced through my mind as I stood before the old mansion, its weathered facade looming like a specter against the twilight sky. My heart beat a little faster. I was drawn to the place not by mere curiosity, but by the strange invitation I had received weeks earlier, written in elegant, looping script. Join us for a weekend of discovery and perhaps revelation. Be brave, for secrets lurk in the shadows. This mansion belonged to my late great-uncle, a man I had only heard about in hushed tones, a figure cloaked in family lore. They said he was a recluse, obsessed with the past, and that his passing had left the house untouched, frozen in time. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the cool evening air, but from the thrill of stepping into a world that had been hidden from me for so long. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as I made my way to the entrance. The door creaked open on its own, as if inviting me in. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Shadows danced in the corners, creating an eerie ambience that both fascinated and frightened me. A grand staircase spiraled upwards, its railings intricately carved, yet covered in layers of dust. Each step echoed in the silence, reverberating through my bones. As I wandered through the rooms, memories seemed to whisper around me. The furniture was draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be uncovered. I ran my fingers over the faded upholstery of an armchair, the fabric coarse and brittle under my touch. I could almost hear laughter and conversation echoing through the halls, remnants of gatherings long past. Then, I stumbled upon a small study, tucked away at the back of the house. A heavy wooden desk sat in the center, littered with yellowed papers and an antique typewriter, its keys coated in a thick layer of dust. I felt a surge of curiosity and began to sift through the documents, uncovering fragments of a life once lived. Among them was a letter addressed to my great-uncle's wife, dated many years ago. The contents hinted at a rift between them, a growing distance filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Just as I was about to piece together more of their story, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lone candle I had lit. The shadows deepened, curling around me like fingers, and I felt an unsettling sensation, as if I were being watched. I quickly gathered myself and left the study, deciding to explore the rest of the house. As I made my way back to the hallway, I noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the corridor. It seemed out of place, as if it had been overlooked by time. Compelled by inexplicable force, I approached it, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. The air grew heavier as I descended, the light from above dimming with each step. I could hear the faint sound of dripping water, a rhythm that felt alive and pulsating. At the bottom, I found myself in a small room that appeared to be untouched by time. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of light filtering through a grimy window, illuminating a peculiar sight. In the center of the room stood an ornate mirror, its surface marred with age yet captivating in its beauty. As I stepped closer, I noticed something unsettling. My reflection looked distorted, warped as if it were struggling to break free. I leaned in, entranced, but just as I was about to touch the glass, a cold breeze whipped through the room, and I stumbled back, heart racing. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence answered, thick and heavy. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease settling in my stomach. Perhaps it was just my imagination running wild, fueled by the stories of the mansion's haunted past. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, when a soft whisper floated through the air, so faint I could barely discern the words. "Help me." The voice was laced with despair, echoing through the dimly lit room. My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but I was alone. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, suffocating and unsettling. I knew I should leave, but the feeling of something pulling me back kept me rooted to the spot. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of footsteps above me, a rhythmic pattern that sent my heart racing. I strained to listen, trying to make sense of the sounds, but they faded away as quickly as they had come. My instinct screamed at me to escape, yet I felt a strange compulsion to uncover the source of the voice that had called to me. Gathering my courage, I turned back to the mirror, peering into its depths once more. As I stared, the surface shimmered and I could have sworn I saw a figure behind me, standing just out of reach. I spun around, but the room was empty. My breath hitched in my throat, and I realized I was not alone. As I stood there, caught between fear and fascination, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had awakened something that should have remained undisturbed. Little did I know, the secrets of the mansion were only beginning to unravel, leading me down a path that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the shadows that linger between them. I stood frozen before the mirror, the chilling sensation of being watched prickling at the back of my neck. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize what I had just experienced. It was just my imagination, I told myself, but the whisper lingered in my mind, a haunting melody I couldn't shake. Gathering my wits, I took a step back, forcing myself to turn away from the room and ascend the staircase. As I returned to the upper levels of the mansion, the atmosphere shifted. The house felt alive, pulsating with stories waiting to be uncovered. The dim lighting made every shadow seem deeper, more pronounced, and I began to feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. Each room I entered was filled with remnants of my great-uncle's life, photographs, furniture, and books left to decay, echoing memories of joy and sorrow. In the parlor, I found a dusty piano, its keys yellowed and cracked. I brushed my fingers across the surface, and a soft note emerged, almost mournful in its tone. It sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of the spectral presence I had felt in the mirror's depths. I was struck by an urge to play, to bring the instrument back to life, but fear held me back. What if the music awakened something that should remain dormant? Instead, I wandered to the window, gazing out at the overgrown garden, wild and unkempt. The sky had darkened, casting an ominous shadow over the estate. As I watched the branches sway against the backdrop of an impending storm, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I squinted, trying to see through the thick glass. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, cloaked in darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move, standing still as a statue, and I felt a chill seep into my bones. The rain began to patter against the window, the sound growing louder as I stepped back from the glass, heart thudding in my chest. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. It was just the wind, the trick of the light, I reassured myself. But the sense of unease gnawed at me. I turned to explore the rest of the house, my feet carrying me back to the staircase leading to the attic. As I ascended, I felt an uncanny connection to the house, as if it were pulling me toward the secrets it held. The attic door creaked ominously when I pushed it open, revealing a room steeped in dust and the smell of decay. Old trunks and boxes littered the space, each one a testament to the lives lived and lost within these walls. I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. Dust motes danced in the dim light, swirling around like tiny spirits. I approached an old trunk in the corner, its lock rusted shut. I knelt down, the urge to pry it open almost overwhelming. What treasures or horrors lay hidden within? With a swift motion, I forced the lid open, and the trunk groaned as it revealed a collection of faded photographs and brittle letters. I picked up a photo, its edges worn. It depicted my great-uncle in his youth, laughing with a woman whose face seemed oddly familiar. I felt a pang of recognition, his wife, the one mentioned in the letter I had found earlier. The next letter I pulled out was addressed to her. As I read it, I began to piece together fragments of their lives, an intense love that had turned into resentment, a bond that had frayed over the years. I could sense the darkness creeping in, their love suffocated by misunderstandings and regrets. The last lines chilled me. "I cannot forgive you for leaving me behind. You must know, I will never truly be gone." A sudden noise broke my reverie, echoing through the attic. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps on the floorboards below. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. I strained to listen, the sound growing louder, more distinct. It was as if someone, or something, was moving through the house, its presence palpable in the stillness of the attic. I stood, heart racing, the letters slipping from my fingers and scattering across the floor. The atmosphere grew thick, charged with tension, and an overwhelming urge to flee seized me. But curiosity held me captive. I needed to know what was happening. I rushed to the edge of the attic, peering down into the hallway. The dim light flickered, and for a moment, I saw the same shadowy figure I had glimpsed outside standing at the foot of the staircase, staring up at me. Its features were obscured, shrouded in darkness, but I felt its gaze pierce through me. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. The figure did not respond, but it began to ascend the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step resonating with an unsettling rhythm. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The air felt charged with an ancient energy, a warning that something was amiss. I turned, desperately searching for an escape route. The attic window was my only hope, but the drop was too high. I glanced back at the staircase. The figure was closer now, its presence palpable and suffocating. In a burst of adrenaline, I dashed to the opposite side of the attic, searching for a place to hide. My hands trembled as I pushed aside boxes, desperately trying to find a space to conceal myself. The thumping grew louder, a cacophony of impending doom, and just as I found a small nook behind a stack of old trunks, I felt the air shift. The figure reached the attic door and paused, standing just outside. I held my breath, every fiber of my being screaming for me to stay silent. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the silhouette of the figure against the light. It stepped inside, and I could see it more clearly now, pale and ghostly, its eyes dark and hollow, filled with an emptiness that sent chills down my spine. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart racing, praying it would pass by and leave me alone. But the whisper came again, clearer this time. Help me. The whisper resonated through the attic, wrapping around me like a shroud. Help me. It was filled with a haunting sorrow, a plea that stirred something deep within my chest. I felt the weight of it, pressing against my ribs, squeezing out the breath I had been holding. The figure lingered at the entrance, its presence both magnetic and terrifying. I dared to crack open my eyes, heart racing, and caught a glimpse of its face. It was obscured by shadows, yet I could make out the contours of its features, an expression of profound anguish etched into its pale skin. Please, the voice came again, trembling and pained. I need you. My heart twisted in my chest. Despite the terror coursing through me, an inexplicable urge to understand, to help, bubbled to the surface. I edged slightly from my hiding spot, curiosity mingling with fear. What do you want? I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. The figure turned toward me, the shadows flickering to reveal a man dressed in clothes from another era, his countenance desperate. Find her, he implored, eyes glimmering with unspoken sorrow. Find my wife. She must know I'm still here. I could barely comprehend the magnitude of what he was asking. Who are you? I stammered, trying to piece together the fragments of his story. I am Thomas, he replied, his voice a blend of despair and hope. I cannot leave this place. She never laid me to rest. My spirit is tethered to the mansion, and I am angry, so angry at the world and at her. Help me find peace. A chill swept through me, resonating with the story I had read in the letters. Thomas, my great-uncle, bound to this world by the unresolved ties of love and betrayal. I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with fear. What happened? I asked, unable to look away from his hollow gaze. He stepped closer, and I noticed the air grew colder around him. She left me to suffer alone, filled with bitterness. I cannot forgive her. But she must know the truth. It was never just her fault. His voice cracked, the weight of his anguish evident. Before I could respond, the attic door slammed shut behind him, rattling the very foundations of the house. I flinched, adrenaline coursing through me. No! I cried out, panic surging. Don't leave! But he seemed to fade, his form wavering like a mirage, as though the very fabric of reality was shifting around him. Find her, he repeated, his voice echoing in the confined space. Before it's too late. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the dim light of the attic, surrounded by memories of a life once lived. The silence felt deafening, and I felt my heart race, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. I stumbled from my hiding place, breathless and disoriented. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of my great-uncle's tragic story. I had to find out what had happened to his wife. Perhaps that was the key to releasing him from his torment, to understand the love that had turned into resentment, the bond that had been severed by pain. Determined, I made my way back down to the main floor, the house feeling different now, charged with energy, each shadow teeming with the echoes of the past. I knew I had to dig deeper, to find the truth hidden within these walls. The parlor caught my eye again, the piano still sitting in the corner, untouched. An idea sparked within me. I rushed back to the study, where I had found the letters, hoping to uncover more about my great-uncle's wife. As I rifled through the papers, I stumbled upon an old family photo album, its cover faded and frayed. I opened it cautiously, the musty scent of old paper wafting up to greet me. Page after page revealed moments frozen in time, weddings, holidays, laughter, and love. But as I turned to the later pages, the smiles faded. There, among the last photographs, I found a picture of my great-uncle and his wife standing in front of the mansion. They looked so happy, but the glimmer in her eyes held a hint of sadness, a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. I turned the page, and my breath caught in my throat. A final image showed her alone, standing in front of a grave. The tombstone bore my great-uncle's name. My heart sank. She had mourned him, but what had happened between them before his death? I needed answers. I rifled through the letters again, searching for anything that could explain their fractured relationship. As I skimmed the pages, I discovered another letter, one that seemed more desperate, filled with regret. It read, "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought we had a chance, but you pushed me away. I only wish to be with you." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, followed by a soft, sorrowful sobbing. I froze, feeling a chill seep into my bones. Was it Thomas? Was it his wife? I could hardly breathe as I realized I had to confront whatever was happening, whatever spirit lingered in the mansion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The sobs grew louder, drawing me toward the parlor where I had first encountered the piano. The air felt thick with anticipation as I crossed the threshold, my heart pounding. There, in the dim light, I saw her, a woman, ethereal and radiant, bathed in a soft glow, weeping silently by the piano. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, her form shimmering with a spectral grace. I knew in that moment that this was my great-uncle's wife, the one he had mourned, the one who held the key to his restless spirit. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice trembling with both fear and empathy. She turned to me, her eyes filled with sorrow and a deep longing. "I came to find him," she replied, her voice a whisper like the rustling of leaves. "I never meant to leave him. I was lost in my own despair." Her spectral presence was both haunting and beautiful, and I felt an overwhelming mix of empathy and sorrow as I gazed into her eyes. "You must be Margaret," I said softly, piecing together the threads of their story. "Thomas is still here. He can't leave because of what happened between you." Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her ethereal gaze. "I was consumed by guilt after he died. I thought I could live with the weight of my choices, but I was wrong. I never forgave myself for not being there." Her voice trembled, echoing the pain of years lost to grief. "Now, he cannot forgive me either. Why did you leave him?" I asked gently, knowing the question was a delicate one. "I thought he was better off without me," she admitted, her voice filled with remorse. "I couldn't bear to see him suffer, but in my selfishness, I abandoned him when he needed me most. I thought if I left, it would ease his pain. I was a fool." Her words resonated with me, filling the room with a profound sadness that seemed to seep into the very walls of the mansion. "But he's still angry," I said, searching for a way to bridge the divide between them. "He needs you to understand that it wasn't just your fault." "I know," she whispered, her form shimmering as her emotions surged. "I've tried to reach him, to show him I'm sorry, but he won't listen. He's too consumed by his anger." Suddenly, I felt a surge of determination. "You need to communicate with him. He's trapped here, but so are you. If you can both find closure, maybe you can set each other free." Margaret's expression changed, hope flickering in her eyes. "But how? I can't reach him. He is blinded by his rage." I remembered the piano, its haunting notes still echoing in my mind. "What if you played? Music has a way of reaching the soul." It could remind him of the love you shared, of happier times. Her gaze flickered toward the piano, and I could sense her hesitation. I'm afraid he'll only hear my sorrow, not my love. You have to try, I urged, feeling the urgency of the moment. You need to show him that your love is still here, that it transcends the pain. With a flicker of determination, Margaret stepped toward the piano, her form shimmering with a new energy. I watched as she placed her delicate fingers on the keys, hesitating for just a moment before she began to play. The sound resonated through the room, filling the air with a haunting melody that was both beautiful and melancholic. It stirred something deep within me, awakening echoes of a forgotten past. Each note seemed to awaken memories, the room coming alive with emotion. As she played, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The shadows that lingered in the corners of the room began to recede, replaced by a warm glow that enveloped us. Margaret poured her heart into the music, and the air grew thick with unspoken feelings, her sorrow transforming into a song of longing and love. Suddenly, the door to the parlor creaked open, and I turned to see Thomas standing there, his form flickering like a flame. His eyes locked onto Margaret, a mix of rage and sorrow etched on his face. "Why do you disturb me?" he growled, but his voice was softened by the melody. Margaret didn't stop playing. Instead, she looked at him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thomas, please, listen to me. I never wanted to hurt you. I've been lost without you. I'm so sorry for what happened." His expression shifted, confusion mingling with pain as the music enveloped him. "You left me," he hissed, but the anger in his voice faltered as the melody washed over him. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she continued, her voice steady despite the tears. "But I see now that I was wrong. I should have fought for you, fought for us. I never meant for you to suffer alone." The music swelled, filling the room with an emotional weight that resonated with both of them. Thomas's form flickered again, caught between anger and the undeniable connection that had once bound them together. "Remember the love we had," Margaret pleaded, her fingers dancing over the keys, drawing forth memories of joy and laughter. "Remember the life we built together." Slowly, I watched as the tension began to dissolve from Thomas's form. The anger that had clouded his presence faded, replaced by the soft glow of longing. He stepped closer, drawn in by the haunting melody, as the shadows retreated from the room. "I never wanted to let go," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the music. "I thought you abandoned me. But I see now. I was just as lost." Margaret's music enveloped him, a tapestry of emotions weaving around their spirits. I felt a warmth grow in the room, the connection between them strengthening as they reached across the chasm of grief and regret. "I forgive you," he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "I forgive you for leaving me. But I need you to forgive me too. I held on to my anger for so long that I forgot how to love." As they faced each other, the air shimmered with a palpable energy, the past unraveling around them like an ancient tapestry. The music swelled into a crescendo, and I felt a shift in the very fabric of the mansion itself. "Let go of the pain," Margaret urged, her voice strong and unwavering. "We can find peace together." With a final, haunting note, the piano fell silent. The room echoed with the finality of the moment, the air heavy with anticipation. Thomas stepped forward, his form solidifying, no longer a flickering shadow but a figure filled with warmth and light. "I love you, Margaret. I always have." And in that moment, the room was bathed in a soft glow, a luminous light enveloping both spirits. They stepped toward each other, their hands reaching out, and as they touched, a wave of warmth surged through the air, washing over me. I felt the house tremble, as if it too were releasing a breath it had been holding for decades. The shadows receded completely, replaced by an ethereal light that filled the parlor. In the blink of an eye, Thomas and Margaret were surrounded by a radiant glow, their forms intertwining in a final embrace. "I'm free," Thomas whispered, his voice echoing in the stillness. As they faded into the light, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me, as if the weight of their suffering had finally been lifted. The mansion sighed, the atmosphere transforming from one of anguish to tranquility. I stood alone in the parlor, heart racing, the echoes of their love resonating within me. I had witnessed something profound, a reconciliation that transcended time and space. But as I turned to leave the parlor, a lingering whisper brushed against my ear, "Thank you." I stepped out into the hallway, feeling the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The mansion, once a place of darkness and despair, now felt alive with hope. As I walked toward the door, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that I had played a small part in bringing closure to a love that had endured beyond death. Stepping outside, I breathed in the fresh air, the storm having passed, leaving behind a clear sky illuminated by stars. The mansion stood behind me, a silent sentinel of the past, now forever changed. I could feel the warmth of their love lingering in the air, a promise that love would always find a way. And as I walked away, I knew their story would remain with me, a reminder that even in darkness, there is always a light waiting to break through. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.